He teaches at the, excuse me, what's his name? The College of New Rochelle, and as well as he's into quite a few other activities of the cultural nature. Dr. Amos Wilson has been with us a number of times. We're very pleased to have him back. I will not delay any further. I'll just bring Dr. Amos Wilson.
Thank you very much. Thank you kindly. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your warm welcome. It is indeed a pleasure to be back with you here again today and to see you keeping the faith and spreading the word, which I'm very happy to recognize, and I'm sure you are recognizing, is, I think, beginning to break through the consciousness of our people on a broad scale. If you looked at the New York Times early in the summer, you saw quite a lengthy article about Afrocentrism versus Eurocentrism, a very interesting piece, quite a lengthy piece. Some of you might have read that piece. You saw a brief discussion on Today's Show with Brother Malefi. Newsday did a magazine cover page on the Afrocentric point of view. About, I don't know, maybe a month or so ago, some of you might have seen that particular piece. And South Africa Today did a piece on the Afrocentric point of view. Not that I measure our success or advancement so much in terms of the European press, but in this instance it does imply that I believe the word that has been put out here year after year from Marcus Garvey and before, I think is finally penetrating and becoming sort of so broadly cultured in the black community that it's beginning to get the attention of other communities, which has negative possibilities as well as positive ones. And sometimes I think the other community may recognize the possibilities in a way that we have yet to do so in a deeper sense. Because during the discussion of Afrocentrism versus Eurocentrism, some of the Europeans saw that that concept was more than a mere concept having to do with culture and perspective, that it really had to do with power. And it ultimately, if it develops to its logical conclusions, will end up in a confrontation of these 2 points of views, as it must end up ultimately. And we have to recognize that that's what it is about. Two ideologies, but not just words, not just ideas, not just perspectives, but things that are concretely related to our existence here upon this earth. If we are to talk about racism, as we hear it talked about so much, we must recognize, of course, that racism does not act in a vacuum, and racism does not operate as an abstraction. But racism is something that is perpetrated by people, by human beings, by individuals, by groups. And too often we have these discussions and we talk about racism as some kind of abstraction, some kind of idea, without recognizing that this is perpetrated by a race of people. And that ultimately, if we are to end racism, we must end the power of those people to perpetrate racism upon this earth. And that means real power confrontation. And ultimately, ladies and gentlemen, it means that the ultimate goals of African people must be the overthrow of European power, no more and no less. Nothing else, no word games, no ideological discussions. It will come down to just that. The European, of course, is picking this up, I think, before many of us who even talk about Afrocentrism are picking it up. And their picking it up is not necessarily an acceptance of the idea, but a preparation to neutralize it. Which means that we have to spread the word even more. And we have to come to even a deeper understanding than just a mere metaphysical one of what Afrocentrism represents. Their attempt will be perhaps to turn it into a fad, which is usually what happens, you see, to co-opt it, you know, and to sell us our own paraphernalia, as they did back in the 60s, you know, and neutralize it into that kind of thing. To give some relevance to it by including an Afrocentric history program in the schools and making it a part of the curricula of schools and universities across the country. Another diversion, by the way. A part of the thing that I want to talk about today relates to this business of African history. Because often I see many people who are concerned about the education of black children and about the education of black people right away suggest the teaching of black history to our children, which is of course very, very important, no doubt about it. But that cannot be the end of an Afrocentric curriculum. In fact, that's the very beginning of the curriculum. And if we just studied African history merely to teach it to the children in terms of events and merely to teach them in terms of the raising of self-esteem, while those things would be important, it would not be enough to advance the interests of the race. It would possibly not solve the deep educational problems that our children are faced with. You see, you could possibly be very proudly African and still have problems in mathematics, you know, science and technology, still have problems in human relations and organization, economic and other kinds of development. You know, after you learn that you're African, you still got to learn bookkeeping, you know, and all the other kind of stuff. You got to pull it off. You got to have real solid knowledge. You got to have scientific organization. It's not enough to just feel good about your Africanness and to know your history well. As I've often said, you will die black and proud if that's where you stop. You see, we're concerned with survival. We're concerned with neutralizing and reducing the Europeans' capacity to perpetrate racism on this earth. And that involves tremendous intellectual growth, tremendous technological development, tremendous economic development, tremendous changes in the way we relate one to another as people, tremendous governmental and other forms of construction. That has to be developed as well. And while history is the beginning point of that, it is not the end point. And if it is not carefully dealt with, it can block that further development. We're not careful about it. What I think is as important as learning about the events of history and the greatness of our past civilizations and so forth is to delve into what I call the psycho-history of our people. You see, what has that history done to the character and personality, social relations of African people? You see, slavery was not a mere exploitation of a people's wealth or of a people's labor. It was not the mere physical restraining of a people. It was a process of personality transformation and inculcation into the African body, mind, and soul of a servile personality, which was permitted to be, quote unquote, free after it had been transformed, so that in its freedom it would maintain its own oppression and would be an ally against its own growth and development, so that its ultimate expression would be self-destruction, as we see out here in these streets, where people, according to their own free will destroy themselves in terms of taking crack and other kinds of drugs. And they will rationalize it in terms of their individual right and freedom to do so. And yet that seed was planted in slavery and built right in. It's often, as I say, this period of slavery then was not merely a period here of constraint upon our people, but was a period of transformation, was the period during which the African was turned into the nigger. I often refer to it as the niggerization of the African. And of course we are going to look a little further back today in how that process started even earlier. How to a degree this enslavement of our people was set up by a niggerization of the Africa on the African continent. In the name of religion. Yes, we have to look at it for what it is and deal with it. In the name of accepting other people's ideologies and other people's interpretations of God and other people's, political and other philosophies without examining them closely. And we will see that, and that's what I'm going to talk about a bit today, even though obviously being a psychologist, history is not my forte. I will just dabble in it enough to illustrate the psychology of things today. And certainly I cannot by any stretch of imagination outdo the great work of Chancellor Williams in this regard, which I think many people misread, because often it is read as a history book, when it must be read, as he so clearly tries to indicate, as a case study. In a sense, it is more fitting to call it a psychohistory rather than a history as such, in the sense that it looks at history in terms of how the historical experience of black people transformed the mentality of black people, and transformed the African in such a way that he is in the condition in which we find ourselves today. In the condition where, even though we live on the richest lands, we nearly starve to death over those lands. And those people in nations whose lands do not contain natural wealth are the people who are seen as the richest today. You've often heard me say that in order for us to be in the condition that we are in, we have to be what? Out of our minds. We have to be crazy. That being out of our minds, that being mentally ill is a political necessity. That the only way that the European can rule this world, being 10% of the world's population, is through lies and deception. And that the only way the European can rule this world is with our cooperation as a people. And with our internalization of those lies, and without taking those lies to be true. And you see this then beginning on the African continent. The first thing that I want to deal with in terms of psychohistory, and of course we dealt with that even in our last lecture here to a good extent, when I tried to show how our amnesia for our history, our forgetting of our history, not only is a forgetting of knowledge, and a forgetting of great events in our lives, and a forgetting of events that can make us feel good about ourselves, but how that amnesia led to a forgetting of methods of technique, methods of coping and problem solving. I dealt with it in our last lecture in terms of how we have forgotten certain economic coping techniques in the forgetting of our history. I tried to illustrate at that time then that the forgetting of history, again, was not a mere forgetting of facts and information and of events, but was a loss of technique, method, and ability and intelligence. That once we look at the history closely and examine it closely, we will find methods and techniques for solving the problems that we are faced with today. I'm going to continue then today with the psychohistory to a degree. I deal somewhat with it in terms of a psychology I think that has developed as a result of our lack of knowledge of history, and not only of African history, but of history in general. I think often, and this subject was suggested during a discussion, that many of us consciously and unconsciously think of ourselves as being cursed, you know, and many of us fall very quickly for the old Ham story, you know, the curse of Ham and the Noah myth that was laid in. You know, it often happens sometimes, many people, when they find themselves sick, you know, ill, you know, why me, and why did it happen to me, and what did I do wrong, you know, and we re-examine ourselves to see what kind of sin we must have committed that this terrible thing could have happened to us. Of course, we have to first face the fact that bad things happen to good people, you know. Being good is no total insurance against bad things happening to you, and there are reasons for that. And so the idea that you may be sick or you may suffer a catastrophe does not necessarily mean that you have been a terrible, evil person or that you committed some great sin in the past. You know, ask Job about that. Lived very well. As a matter of fact, he caught hell because he was what? He was good. God said, I'm going to use you as an example. This is the best. And struck him with illness and so forth. And so, you know, the idea that one suffers necessarily because one has at some point been evil or one has at some point done something terrible does not necessarily wash. But often our people who are ignorant of our history and ignorant of the history of man and ignorant of the human psychology will look at the condition of the African today and consciously and unconsciously say, well, what is it that we did in the past? So we must have insulted God or somebody such that we are suffering the way we are today. And it really must be kind of rough, you see, for those of you who talk about Jesus being black. As well, it's sort of a puzzle there, because you still have to ask this question, if you're black, why are we catching the hell that we're catching today as people? It must really puzzle those who are Christians when they pray and sing to the same Jesus and moan and groan and do all the things that we do in the presence of Jesus, and yet see that Jesus seems to hand all the material goods to the other folk. And we still seem to catch hell. It's almost as if we catch hell to the degree that we believe the deepest, and the degree that we are the sincerest in our praise of our God. And it's hard, consciously or unconsciously, not to wonder, why? Why? What brings this about? Such that the more we pray, somehow the more hell we catch. We bury one black boy and we pray and bury him, and they shoot another one and we bury that one, and we bury a sister and we bury again and again and again. And yet those who pray to the same God we pray to shoot them down and seem to get away with it again, and shoot them down again and shoot them down again. Of course, some of us, you know, are afraid to even think about it. We don't even want to deal with it. Others of us don't think about it out loud, but it's in there. You see, what is it? You must remove from your personality and from your mind this sense of cursedness that we are to make it in this world. This sense that God has it out for you in some sort of way. That fate has it out for you. No, that's not the case. And I think the reading of history demonstrates that very clearly. When we look at then our civilizations and we look at the civilizations of other people, we should look then at the human factors that move and operate in those histories and move and operate in those civilizations. And I will, to a degree, then look at those human factors for a small bit. And I think we will see that it is human causes. You see, we have to recognize that often history, as people say, is written by the victors, right? By the winners, not by the losers. It's often written by the ruling class, not by the plebeians or the other ones on the... So often we get a one-sided view of history. We get a royal history or a history of rulers, and we get a history that is often filled with rationalizations A history where God always seems to be on the winning side. You know, always seems to have sanctioned the winner. He always seems to have justified the taking of other people's territory. With the people, these children of God, as if the other people were children of God as well. The Indians were not children of God. The Africans were not children of God. The other people on these earth were not children of God. We must confront this issue in reality and deal with it as it is. But you see, when the victor writes it up, God told him to go, as we're going to see later, as he told the Israelites, go over and chop all their heads off and chop all the animals and kill them and mess them up. Watch out there. Read the history that the other people wrote, but you won't get that part, will you? You have to be careful when you read these things and think about it. Who's writing it? Why? Under what duress, and for what reason? Because if not, you see, you pick the psychology up. You see, and you get caught with the psychology of cursedness and give up before you even fight, and will not strive to liberate yourself. When we look then at civilizations, we see civilizations determined by a number of factors. The character of the people, definitely. But we notice too that the character of the people does not exist in a mere vacuum. It exists within an environmental context, within an historical context. The character of the people is related to the soil they live on, related to the climate, related to many other factors that surround them. We will see that the rise and fall of civilizations are correlated with the rise and fall of technology and of strategy, with the personality of leaders, with the education and training of the constituents of a civilization, with the societal and political organization of the civilizations, with religion, with culture, and so forth. And it is studying these human institutions, studying these human acts and human activities, that we come to understand the rise and fall of civilizations. The first thing that we have to recognize then is that throughout history, civilizations have risen and fallen. There is no civilization that has been here since the beginning of time, ladies and gentlemen. Civilizations are just like human beings. They are born, they grow in maturity, they mature, and they die. Or they sometimes meet accidental deaths, and other things happen to them. But that is the way in being of the world. That is a metaphysical principle that we have to accept. No civilization lasts forever. They rise and they fall for various reasons. This one you live in today, which does not deserve to be called a civilization, will also pass away. Now you have to get over this impulse you have in yourself that all people have had to get over when they lived in civilization, of the idea that what they have is going to what? Go on forever. That this white man is going to what? Go on forever. The end right now. And this one here is not hardly a good 300 years old. And we often forget that, you see. You have to recognize that the first ones to come in will be what? The first ones often to what? To go out. As civilizations 3, 4, 5, 6,000, what, thousands of years ago. Understand? And civilized this world to a great extent, and brought this world into humanity. But looking at the metaphysics of things and the generality of things, those civilizations being early, being the beginning, naturally, in a sense, would be then those that would pass away, and followed by what? By others. That's the way it's set up, ladies and gentlemen. Not cursedness, not set on by fate, per se. No people are picked out by fate. The Roman civilization did what? Passed away. The Greek civilization, what? Passed away. The Dravidian, what? Passed away. Aztecs passed away. This one is going to pass away. Others are going to pass away. That is the nature of being. But often you see, we just look at ourselves and do not look at the broad scope of human civilizations, the rise and falls. We then will fill ourselves with an inadequate philosophy and psychology that becomes self-defeating. We will not other causes of the rise of those civilizations and the human causes of the falls of those civilizations, and therefore we will fail to learn very vital lessons so that we can rise up again. Once rises among a people does not mean that it does not come again. Because if we look at African history, we see as one African civilization went down, what happened? Others rose up. Others came into being. So that, ladies and gentlemen, while sometimes maybe one of our brother civilizations or sister civilizations may lose, there is no reason why the whole African... And we have to see it that way. After Egypt, we see Napata, and we saw Mali, and we say Songhai, and we saw one what? Coming up. I believe, ladies and gentlemen, it is time now for another to arise and to come into the... But in order for us to bring this new one into being, and I think this, the African American, who to a very large extent is going to be responsible for bringing into being the next African civilization, the predominant civilization on this earth. It's going to be among us, I would believe, that this is going to happen. But we have to go through a process, as we are going through the process right now. And we have to become even more conscious of the process that we're going through in order to bring this change that is of necessity. We see then the changes taking place. I've often asked the question, are we as African people to get rid ourselves to overthrow the European civilization only to be now to fall under the weight of the Asian situation? We are at the crossroads as a people, and we must make some vital and quick choices. It's very, very important that we make these choices. We must also recognize, though, that at times some ethnic groups and other groups have faded from this earth. And that possibility also stares us in the face as people. The mere survival of our people on this earth today. When you look at African civilizations, and I haven't done the complete calculation, but roughly speaking, there have been no civilizations on this earth that have lasted as long as the African civilizations. In fact, if you add up, I believe, the years of the existence of African civilization and the civilizations and the predominance of African civilizations, you probably have to run a span of something from what, about 10, probably over what, 20,000 years of African predominance. You name me a European, Asian, or any other civilization that has that record. So it would appear to me that fate and God, or whatever you want to call him, has been very much on our sides. We have a so-called European civilization, and particularly this United States aspect of it, would be lucky if it makes it to 300. These so-called recent civilizations are but twinklings in the eye of African civilizations. And we must see that then and integrate that into our philosophy and into our psychology as a people. We must recognize, as I've had pointed out when I do more economical kinds of lectures, that great civilizations are built on great economies and political administration. Often I've said that when we talk about Egyptian civilization, other civilization, we emphasize the temples and we emphasize the gods, And these kind of things, and while that has its advantages, we must not forget, though, that these civilizations were founded on solid economic foundations and upon human organization and human relations. The mere belief in Egyptian gods would not have been enough for Egypt to have flowered into civilization and for it to have accomplished what it accomplished. There are other factors that must exist there as well. You will not find a great people and a great civilization not having in some way or another an economic niche, control of some kind of economic set of resources, control in one way or another of some kind of set of economic circumstances. You can have all of the ideology and good feelings you want in the world, but until you have economic control and political control of yourself, you will not rise to greatness. While knowing oneself is important and is necessary, it is not totally sufficient. Other things must back it up. As I've said in other occasions, you may teach our youngsters to think mathematically, you may teach them to think scientifically and so forth, but if you do not provide an economy for these youngsters, you will still suffer oppression. Because science and technological development is intimately related to economic and political structure. Science develops out of a political structure. Science ultimately is a political product, not merely the product of some genius or some scientist in some lab or other, the way it is presented to us. No, you have to have a social system, an economic system that produces science. When you get these young men and these young women to thinking mathematics and science, and when you get them developed in their scientific technique, you have to also provide them with the laboratories that they have to work in. You have to provide them with the universities. You have to provide them with the cyclotrons that if you don't have today, you are not doing physics. Cyclotrons is that circle, a circumference of some 50 miles around, surrounded by heavy magnets, surrounded by miles and miles of electrical cables, surrounded by computer after computer. It takes an economy to support that kind of research. No matter how much knowledge you have in your head, you will not be able to transform your power position unless you transform your economic position in the world. You're faced with the devastation of AIDS today. AIDS is an intellectual type of warfare. It is a battle of minds. It is a battle of research. It is a battle of economics. It is a battle of distribution systems, a battle of education, not of bombs, not of planes, not of bows and arrows, but of mentality and laboratories and universities. It means then that you not only must prepare your young men and women to think scientifically and do the scientific research, you must then give them the labs and the universities in which they do the research and produce the vaccines and the other preventatives so that the people can be inoculated against the germ warfare of another people. You must recognize that it does not matter today whether Africans are flying jet planes, whether Africans are driving tanks, whether Africans can buy weapons from the United States and so forth, unless an African nation is in the position to do Star Wars and to fight wars 500 and 600 miles out in space, you can forget it. And Africa has yet to enter the space race. I have told you that the mere riding of black astronauts up in some space satellite does not bring African people into the space race at all. You're just going along for the ride until you can send your own satellites and your own rockets in space. Do not be deceived. As a matter of fact, we're often deceived by these spectacles, by these circuses that put our men and women in these satellites and makes us think that we're a part of the modern age. Unless you own it and unless you control it, you're not in it. It's the same kind of mentality as I was talking to our brothers as we rode over here that makes us talk about black banks. You know, when there's no such thing as a black bank. No such animal. When in a way it's been the black banks that have retarded black economic development. Peculiar statement, isn't it? When your premier black bank on 125th Street has presided over the Asianization of your economy. Look at it. Worth $30 or $40 million, can't lend but $1 million. That's right. Study economics, ladies and gentlemen, understand what's going on. Do not be deceived by black people hanging out behind bars in there. By black vice presidents and presidents. Any institution that is run according to the rules and regulations of another people is not yours. That's right. Any institution that has to follow this lending policies and other policies, the rule and regulation of your enemies is not yours. I don't care how many black people you got in it. That's why, despite the fact that it sits in the middle of your community, you cannot get anything out of it. And the other people grow and prosper right in the face of your so-called banks. Because you haven't come to understand the concept of banking in its deepest sense. You haven't come to understand that you don't need another people's permission to start a bank or to develop a bank. You don't have to run one according to the definition of other people. That you must define the rules and regulations in terms of your own reality and move it forward from that. But often you see it's accepting these false definitions and accepting these false concepts that destroy us. And it's until we redefine these concepts and look closely at what is going on that we will not rise and move forward as a people. And we've got to do that in a hurry. When we look then into civilization, we see human factors operating. We see then, of course, and we're familiar with the Egyptian civilization and its relationship to the soils and to the Nile River. And we see that relationship between those soils, the Nile River, and mathematics and scientific development and so forth. We see civilizations coming into being with the construction of cities. But you cannot have the construction and development of cities until your farmers produce a surplus of crops that can feed those city populations, that can free those people from digging for their food so that they can concentrate on business development and trade. So when you see these cities coming into being, you know then that there has been a development in agriculture and social organizations such that these cities now can support people whose chief concern is business. In fact, in my last lecture I did for Brother Harold over here, I believe it was in Linden, New Jersey, here, and when I tried to get across the idea that we as blacks have accepted this concept that doing business is Jewish, that accounting is Jewish, you know, that Wall Street, that stock markets, that investment, the creation of wealth is Jewish and white. Pitiful, pitiful, pitiful way of thinking. Defeating. That's right. Look at your history again. Look at your history beginning in Mesopotamia and the production of cities. What are people doing in cities? They are trading. They are bargaining. They are what? Accounting. They are organizing. They're sending ambassadors. They're administrating. When you talk then about your cities being the first cities on this earth, when you talk about your empires being the first empires on this earth, you are then talking about the fact that you've been in the professions of accounting and been in the professions of doing business and money making and investing and all of these other factors long before the white man ever knew what business ever was. And then you have nerve enough to see yourself as not business people. Business is your tradition. Wealth creation is your tradition. When you look at those pyramids, You just see a pile of stone? Do you just see some technique there? You must look at it carefully and see what an economy that allows this kind of building to take place. When you see those stones stacked one upon top of another, you will not see the God stacking those stones. You will see men stacking those stones. And you will see men and women and people who have to be what? Paid and provisioned and supervised and administered and accounted for and regulated. And you got the nerve to say that your forte is not administration, accounting, and taking care of business, and that business belongs to Jews. You have to be out of your mind. It's good to look at Egypt in terms of religion and Amen and all the other ones. You know, fine. But when you get through looking at it in terms of Osiris and all the rest of the jackals and whatever else you look at, also come down to earth a little bit here and say, how was it that Egypt was able to finance this civilization? How was it that Egypt was able to develop the stonemasons and the architects and the supervisors and all of the other professions that had to go into the development of that civilization that lasted for over 3,000 or 4,000 years? Ladies and gentlemen, then you will recognize that business is yours. Money making is what? Yours. Wealth creation is yours. And it is you who taught it to the others. And it is yours to take back again and to use again. We must look at these human factors. Let's be very careful when we're talking revolution and rebellion, not to carry over these, these hidden forms of mental control. You see, where in escaping the European ideology, we also carry over a religious ideology that makes us concentrate purely on the religion of Egypt or purely on the high levels of Egypt and not look at its everyday factors and everyday functioning. Because even in the process of looking at this thing, we're still left asking questions as to how we're going to get out of the situation we are in today. And we're still asking questions as to how civilizations are built and how they are structured and how they come into being. And as we move off the plane then of the gods, because let me tell you, you have to have an economy to build up a priesthood. Yeah, a real solid priesthood where you got a whole bunch of priests spread all over the country, priests with temples. And then when you look at these Egyptian priests, you're not just dealing with people who are bowing into God. These are men who are in control of vast plantations and who hire a great number of the scribes and accountants to keep up with the collection of the harvest and so forth. So don't just get caught up in the religious stuff. Look at the other stuff as well, because to a great extent, the religious is a reflection of the more basic economic. You have to produce surplus to pay your preachers, don't you? Yes. You have to pay your preachers and priests what? Out of your surplus earnings. You have to overproduce to a degree to support your priesthood, so that that priesthood can regulate life and to build what? Your temples, and to orchestrate. And many of you belong to churches that are what? National organizations that are administered where? Across the whole nation, that have legislatures in them. You have a whole government structure within the African churches today, that some of them don't even stop where? In the United States, but go across the United States right into other nations. We as black people sit here with national governance bodies, and then when we talk about being a nation of people, people think you're talking about something hard. And yet we do it day in and day out. So the precocity of the Egyptian civilization was related to the nature of the Nile, as we know. The civilization of China rose in the valleys of the Yangtze and the Huanghe rivers. And again, we see here rivers that are producing soil, and soil that produces an abundance of wealth, so the civilization can come into being. We see, of course, the Euphrates and Tigris soil producing the Sumerian, Mesopotamian civilizations. We see then the Indus Valley, also a civilization being developed around the river itself and around the delta whose 5 rivers spring from that river itself. We see then that there is a material base to civilization, an environmental base to civilization. We can look at the Greek civilizations. Gods? No, we run again into soil. And see, this is another thing we have to get over too, you know, and we definitely have to get over our high school and lower school education. You see, you know, we hear the glory that was Greece, the glory that was Rome. And really only people can call it that who haven't read the history very closely. And it leaves you with an impression, you see, because if you don't study the real politics, you're left off with, and so you'll think Aristotle is what all Grecians were like, walking around having stolen knowledge, philosophizing, thinking great thoughts. You know, and so you go through the college and you go through the school and they throw one Greek philosopher after you after another one, Socrates and this and that, and if you don't watch yourself, you think all the Greeks were running around thinking hard, you know. And we talk about the genius of Greece. Come on, ladies and gentlemen. Remember what I told you. History is written by what? The victors and the upper class and the other people. And those are almost always what? Tiny members of the whole population. Rationalizers of their history. You see. And you have to look at the reality. The Romans were some of the most cruel, ruthless, uncivilized people you'd ever want to see on this earth. Yes. Yes. Terrible. How much art did they really produce? How much science did they really produce? Think about it. How much literature did they really produce? Think about it for a while. Why did it fall apart? Why did Rome tumble to pieces? Why did the so-called empire of Alexander tumble to pieces? Why did Athens fall? Why did Sparta fall? Look into those things. Get over your glorification of these people. Reread Homer's Iliad and get over the glorification of that and look at the bloody mess that you're reading about in that so-called great story. The cruelty there. The gods even coming down, getting in on the bloodletting. Yeah. The guys, raiders, thieves, whole nations, thieves, killers, hating to farm, hating to organize themselves, and therefore set themselves up to raid other people and destroy other people, and then call it what? War. Are you kidding? No. And you look at one at the other, you see economics at the bottom of each one. Robbing and what? Robbing, raping, stealing, killing, cruelty, one cruelness after the other. One book I want to mention here is a book by a guy named Koblenz who talks about title From Arrow to Adam, and he looks at the psychological side of war and recognizes to a great extent that man is really not basically warlike as we tend to think. And you look at then the methods by which you get people into war. And you begin to realize that most men have to be what? Forced to go to war. Yeah. You got to get them in on the what? The draft. You got to make them feel ashamed for not fighting. You got to ostracize them. You have to threaten them with dishonorable discharges. You have to threaten them with court-martials. You have to threaten them with all kinds of things to get them out there in this bloody gore. But you know, people want to make us think, oh, this is some natural instinct of humanity. If it's so natural, then why you have to get people and push them as such? You have to bribe them. Yeah. And many of these ancients that you saw going to war went to war for gain. Not for any great love of country, great honor, because they could get something as a result thereof. Because in the end, they would be counting up the gold and counting up the stuff that they had stolen from the people they had just overrun, who often didn't cause the war at all. That's right, and you can see the army administration and the king sitting there and says, now you got to bring all this stuff and put it in the pile first. Right? And then, of course, the king gets his share, and God gets his share. I guess that's the priest, right? And then, yeah, you know, you're going to put a tenth. You think this tithing just started with the Christian church? That started with warfare. Okay, you know, the king get his bit, and after the king get his goats and sheep and all the other stuff, and then the officers get theirs, and then what? You know, you give the soldiers some. And you should see some of the inducements. Oh, you won't have to pay taxes after you get out. Oh, you won't be on part of a forced labor gang, you know, for the state once you get out. All of these things are put in. You can see back in the Babylonian times, the king telling the people, I'll pay you for every head that you bring in. And they talk about then thousands and thousands of cut off heads stacked like pyramids. And so each soldier coming in with the head, making sure that it is counted by the accountant. So when the time came for handing out the gold, he would get his share. This is the reality of things, ladies and gentlemen. But when you let another people teach you that history and lay on you the glories, and you misperceive what it is about. It can be glorious, but it also can be inglorious. I've often said that the drug laws takeover of our community is not fundamentally different from United States imperialism. The United States tells Russia or someone else, South America is what? Ours. What did Monroe call that? The Monroe Doctrine? Manifest destiny? Yeah. Oh, it didn't matter what the South Americans had to say about it, did it? They didn't have anything to do with it. This is ours. You stay out. You know, these are the people we're going to exploit. The Caribbean is what? Ours. You can't come in. The Russians, Eastern Europe is what? Ours. The Chinese, Southeastern Asia is what? Ours. And each one of them claims the people and claims the territory and regulates those people to what? To its economic, political, and social advantage. But we call this national interest. Right? And we hide it behind high-sounding diplomatic words. And we hide it behind diplomacy and good manners when it is nothing but thievery and robbery and exploitation of another people. And then when the drug people over here in Jamaica and other places come in without permission of the people, say, this is our territory. Nobody else is allowed to sell crack here but us. These are the what? The crooks and the criminals. Certainly they're crooks and criminals. But so are the peoples and nations that rule over and exploit and take over other nations without the consent of those nations as well. But we must understand the psychology of the language, or else we'll be taken in by that psychology. Because what will happen often, that's what happens when people read the Bible and other things, once you've been inculcated with these distortions of language, you will not read your Bible, you will not read your Quran, you will not read your history, you will read into it. You will impose the vision on it. You will not see the word. You will create a story on the word instead of letting the word speak right to you. And then people say, well, now you have freedom to read. You know the old phrase, the best way to hide something from Negro is to what? Put it in writing. Yeah, put it right in your face. Yeah. Take the scales of European catechisms from your eyes and really read the Old Testament for a change. Yeah. Really read it. God is the same today as he was yesterday. As Yusuf's, the father of the young man, said, if this was the Old Testament God, we'd be over there in this and earth, you know, Doing a tooth for a tooth and what? An eye for an eye. Because the God of the Old Testament didn't take it. And I'm going to be back to that in a minute. You don't have to believe me. Read it for yourself. Read it. It's there right in front of your eyes. But that Holy Ghost has got you where you can't see it. You read right into it. Just like people read the Iliad and these other things and read Roman history, read about Caesar and doesn't see what a crook and a thief he is. And he was. Because of civil war, a man greedy decides that since he has the strength and power to take over the Roman city and the Roman Senate, he does so. Oh, beware the Ides of March. You know, we get carried away with that stuff. This great Caesar, et tu, Brutus. Come on. Look at the reality of the situation here. See, these are human factors operating, you see, but we forget those. The Athenian situation is interesting because, in a sense, Athens did not have any good land. It had no soil. So what did it have to do? It had to go out into the what? Into the sea and become a great maritime power, because that was the source of its survival. Its soil, they had decimated their soils and deforested their soils, and their ignorance of husbandry and the ignorance of agriculture and so forth permitted them to ruin their soils until, if they were to survive, they had to take to the sea. The only thing they had to trade really worth much was what? Olive oil and wine, because that was about the only thing they can grow on the soil after they got through with it. But they took what appeared to be a deficit, and using what? Human ingenuity, and using a sense of reality, and looking and using human creativity, and says, since we can't make it and we can't eat olives and drink wine all day, and these people were great lovers of meat and bread, and since we cannot produce enough wheat and so forth from our own soils, we've got to get in the business of trade. And then how do we do it then? We're going to ship our oils and our wine and whatever else we can to other countries. And we have to make ceramics so that these things can be exported and imported. And while we're at it, we'll make beautiful ones, and we'll even sell the jars sometimes, even if they don't have anything in them, and so forth. So you see a connection between that, well, what? And art and other kinds of things developing, though, out of what? The soil and out of human ingenuity. We see them, though, finding it necessary to be superior to other maritime nations. Because if they are to carry on that maritime trade, they must protect their merchant marine from pirates and the other raiding nations that surrounded them. So then they must get involved in the deep study of physics and the deep study of science and mathematics. Not because some God is sitting up there blessing them or cursing them, but because of the pure necessity of things that existed there. When we look at the civilization of Sparta, a warlike civilization, we'll see again that Sparta, of course, developed out of a great soil, but it didn't have a whole lot of it. And it had to protect that soil. And it didn't want to get involved in export and import because it reckoned that getting involved with that would bring in foreign ideologies and foreign influences and dependencies. And that as long as they could contain that soil and contain their community and control those slaves, they could make it. But the only way they could do that was to build a mighty army and a mighty war machine. As a matter of fact, the whole society then became a war machine. Its sole purpose almost was what? War. War. And we shall see its young boys from the age of 7 through the age of 20 were trained for warfare. Training, learning, teaching, not blessings thrown down from heaven. As someone told us before, that God has blessed you already before you pray, because he's blessed you with a what? A brain, a mind, creativity, thought power, the ability to relate in particular sort of ways. As I had pointed out earlier, an economy is not the mere existence of money, nor the mere existence of natural wealth. It ultimately must be grounded on a set of social relations, the way people systematically relate one to the other. You can have all of the wealth in the ground that you want and money that you want in your pockets. That still does not mean that you have an economy until you create a systematic way of relating one to the other and a systematic way of distributing and allocating that money. We look at the African American today with pockets full of money but no economy, because the necessary set of human relations and the relations that we should have one with the other are not in place. When we relate one to the other in the correct manner, when we deal with one another in the correct manner, when we establish the right ideology and ethics among us as a people, then we will take advantage of the wealth that we have and the power that we have today in this world. The Japanese, with no natural wealth at all, no natural resources at all, but what? A mind. Using the mind to challenge the hegemony of the United States, to challenge and nearly overthrow the hegemony of Europeans. And the United States is blessed with some natural resources. And yet you'll hear American economists talking about the United States becoming a third world nation. Why? And when the United States sees itself in danger, what does it do but look at the education of its youth? Look at the character of its youth and how the character and education and the relationship and the society itself must be reorganized if the nation is to survive. Because they ultimately recognize that the survival of the people is ultimately right there in their skull. And it hangs on this situation. Not just what you're given, even though what you're given gives you a head start and can make life easier for you, but you got to add something to it. You got to bring your mind to it. We look at the civilizations of Africa, we look at Ghana, and we see that Ghana rises up on a base of what? Gold, salt, iron, manufacture, agriculture, and so forth. We look at Mali, and what do we see? Similar things. Control, gold, salt mines, control of caravan routes, being in strategic locations, having control of intellectual cities, control of Timbuktu, and of the other university cities of the African soil, and using those things as a basis for its power. We look at Shanghai, and what do we see again? The same thing. In other words, if you want to rise to greatness, a part of that rising to greatness then must involve getting control of your economic selves and getting control of your economic situation and circumstances. Not mere bowing and scraping and praying and carrying on. That's a part of it, but that's not the total of the story. Not merely the building of temples, but a concrete relationship with the reality of one's life and with the reality of human relations. When we look then at the decline of Rome, you see, because we often look at our decline and we forget about the fact that other civilizations have declined as well. You know, when you think about the word empire, you know, it reminds you of the Marxian dialectics in a sense. That in a sense that which makes your nation great also bears the seed of that which is what? Going to destroy it. In a sense, you know, as I saw in the Kung Fu movie once, where this guy says what? Your strength is what? Your weakness. See, this is the thing you have to learn. America's strength is her weakness. Look at you here today, recording. Oh, she won't put you on TV. Won't put you on the 6 o'clock news. But we don't have to wait on that to get the word around anymore, do we? Right? We can put our people right on TV sets and put that VCR right in. Audios, the whole thing. And so America's strength is what? Her weakness. You take that strength, man, and now you use it against her. And when I talked earlier about Afrocentrism, it's spreading on the airwaves, it's spreading through the TV sets, it's spreading through satellite, it's going all over. In other words, Europe brings her destruction right with her in her technology. And all we have to do is what? Use it. Apply our ingenuity to it. And this is what happens to empires, ladies and gentlemen. That's the nature of the beast. When you talk about an empire, what are you talking about? Sometimes a small group of people who through ingenuity, through strength of character, through perceptiveness, have gained dominance over larger groups of people. People of different ethnic backgrounds sometimes, different customs and cultures. That's the strength of that civilization, isn't it? Because then that civilization can tax its colonies, can make them pay tribute, and therefore it increases in what? Wealth and strength, can support its army and its administration and so forth based on this taxation, exploitation. When you look at the empire of the United States, what do you see? A country that's living solely on what it produces within its own borders? Of course you don't. When you look at the so-called British Empire, do you see a country that either living solely on the production of its borders? You have been deceived into thinking that these countries are independent economies. And in many ways they are what? Dependent economies. Yet again, when we let other people define things for us, you see, we get it backwards. And I've often told you before that if the European is to rule this world, being 10% or less of the world's population, he can only rule the world by doing what? Turning things what? Backwards. That's the only way he can do it. So that the nations that are called powerful are in effect really what? Weak, dependent, are fed and supported by nations that are called weak. Black people called poor create what? The wealth for the wealthy. Harlem called poor and run down is being feasted on by all kinds of ethnic groups. If you were really that poor, why would they be there? What could they be getting out of your neighborhood? You got wealth. You got wealth. But you have to not know it. You have to not be aware of it. You have to be alienated from it mentally in order for it not to be used. But so when you build an empire, what you have is a bunch of disgruntled people and groups just waiting for the moment that they can break loose, right? Yeah. It's not all what? Peace and harmony and glory and all of that stuff. No, not by a long shot. You got people who are exporting their best cattle, exporting their best agriculture, exporting maybe even their sons to fight in the imperialist war, just as we do, give our sons and people over to these people who say, hey, the moment you show weakness, the moment a weak leader comes up, and they do come up in civilizations, the moment there's social disorganization, the moment other enemies attack you from the outside, that's the moment we're getting out. That's the moment we're going to betray you. That's the moment we're going to ally with somebody else who we think may overthrow you and make a deal with us. That's the nature of human reality, ladies and gentlemen. We see in the Roman Empire and the other empires, people spoiled by their wealth. Right? Power corrupts. And what does it say? Absolute power corrupts what? Absolutely. Destroyed by your what? Success. The Romans, why were they such fighters? A small group of people. People who had character and strength as long as they were closely tied to their soil. And as long as they tended that soil. But they became a war machine, training their youth from early age. And this is another thing I want to point out to you. You see, it's not happenstance. You can look at the Israelites and all the rest of them who were helped by God. And yet you'll notice one thing, they still didn't hesitate to train their armies.
That's right.
They still didn't hesitate to buy military weapons. They still didn't hesitate to raid somebody else's property. They still didn't hesitate to develop economies and other kinds of things. So even in that illustration, even if they were disfavored of God, And I'm going to show you in a minute they were favored because they were so hard-headed. Some of the most difficult people in the world. Keep reading, and you see Moses keep throwing up his hand. What? Lord, what am I going to do with these hard-headed people? Right? As soon as I turn my back, they're acting up. Grumbling, fighting. At one point, they were almost ready to kill him and throw him out. He had to run to the Lord and say, protect me from these people because they get ready to eat me up. He told him to go out there and strike a rock, right, and let the water jump out. Cool them off for a while. But even after that, they were still disagreeable. Grumbling, you brought us out of Egypt, out here to starve in this desert? You know? And he doggone it, some manna had to rain from the sky to cool them out. Come on, read it. It's right there. Rebellious, hard-headed, hooked in other men's people's women. Oh yeah, read the story of the Midianites. How many are familiar with that? Israeli men hanging out with these foreign women, partying, having fun, becoming what? Adulterated by that culture, becoming adulterated by that God. And what does God tell them they had to do to those men and those women? Who remembers that? Chop them up, ladies and gentlemen, cut heads. Thousands of them. One had a nerve to walk in the middle of the council with the Midianite woman on his arm. Dapping around. You know, that reminds you of some others, don't you? And what did one of those great prophets and great leaders do? Went right over and chopped his head right off. Come on, read reality. See what's going on there. A God that promises you another people's land. Come on, deal with it. And believe me, I'm not talking about God for those of you in the church. I'm talking about Israelites. Okay? I'm talking about human beings. And I'm talking about people who write history the way they see it. Oh, you think because of all those little miracles that went on in Egypt that these people march out in one faith and one belief in the power of God. And after that great demonstration of the Passover that they would be happy and know who their God was. Reread it again. As soon as Moses went up on the mountain and stayed too long. Where's Moses? He's gone, he left us. What's going on here? You don't know what the hell he's doing. We got to get somebody else. I'm saying this because white people think they're the only people that fight and, fuss and fight. You know what I'm telling you? And they sit and read this Bible and don't read it. That's right. He stayed too long. He ain't coming back. Aaron, make us a god. That's right. Yeah, Aaron, the assistant of what? Moses, the mouthpiece of Moses. That's right. All right? What does he do? Throw your rings in the pot. Throw your diamonds over here. Right? And what? So let's melt it down. Melt it down and build a gold can and get down to it. Silliness. Being blessed by God doesn't make you not silly. I see that. You still have to have common sense. Right? You still have to think. I'm saying that because a lot of the Lord will take care. Yeah. All right? We don't have to do nothing. We don't have to think. We don't have to prepare. We don't have to organize. We don't have to develop economically. We don't have to know who we are. We don't have to know what we're about. The Lord will take care. You better get off of that. Where is Israel today? That's right. Where are the Hebrews? Come on. You have to deal with reality. That's right. What went on there? Moses went up on the doggone mountain. And that's an interesting thing even to look at that. Moses is going up the mountain in part, I would speculate, because these people are misbehaving so badly in the first place. And he needs a what? A unified code. A unified system of ethics. a unified system of worship, of laws and so forth, to bring these people what? Under one code, and bring unity to these people who fight like cats and dogs. He's up on the mountain and they hear the people down there partying. Oh, read it. God said, well, you know, Moses said, what's going on down there, sister? God said, they down there partying, man. You better get down there and check them out. He goes down there with the doggone tablet, and he breaks the doggone tablet if they're carrying on so much. What did he have to do after he got down there and saw them in such a mess? He had to kill over 3,000 of them to bring them around. He said, those who are with me and who believe in what I believe in, what? Step up here. And those of you who don't, you stay down there and you see what happened to them. And he called them out. He called them out. Got rid of them. Read it. Because it talks, read it, it's psychology. I tell people the Bible is the greatest source of psychology you will ever know. The greatest source of human nature and the understanding of human nature and nations you'll ever know. There's time to read it as a religious text. I have no problem with you reading it that way, but you can also read it as a psychology text, as a philosophy text, a book that looks into humanity and the way human beings behave. There was about 24,000 Israelites killed around the time of that Midianite disaster. Yeah. And then you go from there and you go into Samuel. I know you good Christians know about that one, don't you? Why was Saul driven crazy? Why was the first king driven crazy? Disobeying God, right? What did God told him to do? Don't remember that one? Huh? He told him to go over into this country and do what? Kill everything standing. Dogs, cats, women, men, boys, everything. Wipe them what? Wipe them all out. All of them out. Kill them all. And what happened? Come stepping back there even with the king of the country. And coming back there with, oh, well, these was good animals. They were too good to kill, so we had to bring them back. Oh, man. And what did Samuel do? Chopped them up. Cut them down. And Saul was struck with insanity for disobeying God. What is going on with this psychology here? It's straightforward. This is a nomadic people, a bunch of raiders. Yes, that's what they are. Hard-headed, disagreeable, having to wander around in the wilderness 40 years again because of hard-headedness and so forth. Yeah, because see, a lot of people think, you know, Jews being, you know, that's stolen as well, but being the blessed of God, they also think that they are what? Better. Come on, read it. It's right there. Right there. But what did they know? They knew. And let me tell you, you know, and it's interesting to look at Moses. And you see Moses negotiating with God, don't you? Yeah, but God wanted to get to those Israelites. Said, let me have them. I'll get there and do them what? I'll smoke them all. Moses said, no. Wait a minute. I'm telling you. Read it. Read it. No. He worked something out. Let's do this. Let's do this. Because these people are so terrible. They just need to be gotten rid of. No. But what's going on here? Moses knows we got to put something on these people and give them some kind of unified philosophy, religion, and God, so that they can act under that God, and even this small band of people will be able to overcome large nations, right? But we also got to make them tell them that what God is a jealous God. That the instant you stop worshiping this God, which means the instant you start hooking into your culture, the instant you start following the rules and regulations of your culture, the instant you start cutting your identity off from your basic culture, the instant you start taking in foreign ideologies and women and men and all other kind of foreign objects and do not understand them, that is the minute you're going to lose the favor of God, and your civilization will what? will tumble and fall apart. And we see it in civilization after civilization, and time after time. We look at the prophets, and what do we see? Prophets coming up saying what? Time and time again, what? Get back to what? Get back to God. Get back to your ways. You're worshiping idols. You're picking up other people's religions. You're picking up other people's ideologies. You're speaking other people's languages. You're taking in other people's concepts of things. That shall destroy your nation. And to the point that you begin to let yourself soak up these foreign ideologies and these other kinds of things, you shall be scattered to the wind, and your enemies shall come and capture you and take over you. And that is what happened, what? Time and time again. But you see, we don't read the book in the way that it what? Instructs us. That is why we pray to the same God and say something to the same God, but the blessings seem to go in two different directions. Which means that our covenant with that God somehow has got to be reconstructed. Because God is, I'm sure God is not here to give you a hard time, but you got to meet him. Moses met him. Moses negotiated with him, and he was telling them, and they came to what? A covenant and a what? An agreement, a contract that says if you keep this and this and do this and this and so and so what? Things will work out for you. You see? But when you start cutting this loose, what? It's over for you. And you have problems. Terrific problems. And this is what we see. When we look at then the civilizations and their decline, we often see the same thing going on. Rome getting rich, fat, and lazy. It used to be that the center of the Roman army was the landowner. If you owned land, you did the what? The fighting. And the more land you owned, the farther out up front you were. Not like we got it today, right? The more you own, the more what? Other people you can send out. You see? They got like that when? Toward the end, which spelled their doom. They started buying their place in the army. You know, hey, let me pay you off. After a while, they made it even against the law for many of them to even go and be a part of the army. In the end, their army was made of what? Mercenaries and foreigners. Yeah. The very Praetorian Guard that guarded the emperor was under the control of other people. They made and broke kings. They were bribed into electing emperors and other things like that. Their soil was misused and run over. In fact, Hannibal did the greatest damage to them of all. As a matter of fact, Hannibal defeated them. By just defeating their soil, by defeating their social organization, and ultimately destroying their will and their character as a people. Dying on the vine, giving up their old traditions and giving up their insights in the world. We look at Egypt, of course, and we see again the nature of empires. And we have to look at it. I know the state of mind that we're in. We're trying to get over our traumas. We're trying to get over our complexes and so forth. And I understand that often that does necessitate the emphasizing of the positive. But also we are in a position of nation building, civilization building. We're in a position of trying to survive. We're in a position to try to make it through the next centuries as a people. In studying also the pride of our civilization, we must, as Chancellor William projected, study also the problems. Why did it fail? Why did it fall apart? What was going on? Did Egypt become too feudalistic? Did it get to a situation where too much of the land was in the hands of its priestly classes or in the hands of its nobles, and the smaller people and lower people having nothing or very little and overworked and overtaxed, such that they too then began to riot and begin to have discontent that ultimately began to disorganize the civilization, particularly as that civilization was attacked by the Asians and by outside forces, and a social system organized along feudalistic lines where you have a major king or emperor, but you have a lot of what? Sub-kings and sub-rulers. Can that empire stand up when it is being attacked from a number of different ways and directions, and not fracture so that kings will have a piece of this and another king will have a piece of that? And when it fractures that way, will not those kings of these separate areas vie with each other to become the supreme king again? These are the kinds of things, and that's why you have to look at what? Social organization, the political organization of states and of empires, so that when you rebuild your civilization again and your nation again, you will have this knowledge available to you, so that you can build one that will not be fractured in the way that the earlier ones were fractured. And we see then Egypt going through this, and we see though again, as Egypt forgets and integrates, as Chancellor Williams indicates, bringing in those Asians into the very heart of its empire. You noted it got at one point where the Asians had replaced African laborers. Oh, you know, this is not the first age where black people were complaining about Asians having jobs and having control of the economy. They were complaining about that during the Egyptian Empire. Did you know that? Yeah. They had slipped them in. They had gotten themselves in positions through marriage and all other kind of games, and got to where they were controlling vital areas, or very heavy influence in vital areas. And we have a situation that's very much similar to where Africans exist today. Even in their own lands, other people have the vital positions and control of the economy. Yeah. Yes. And you must understand that psycho-history and understand that psychology of futures about. And you can begin to understand then the viciousness with which the Israelites defended their cultural integrity. They recognized that they could not survive otherwise. And so we can see then that each time Egypt gets in trouble, it gets in trouble because of these Asians and white-skinned people and these other people attacking and coming in. And because often it was not as prepared politically and organized as well as it could have been to deal with these people. And because it had permitted these people, some of them got into the priesthood and gotten into other vital cultural areas of Egyptian life. And we see Egypt only coming back when? And recapturing itself when? When it goes back to its what? Its origins. When it goes back down home, right? And goes south. And goes back to the blackest of the black. And forget about those mulattoes and people and goes back where? Back down south. And gets its religious orientation together again. Gets its ethnic orientation together again. Gets its genius together again. Gets its military organization together again. And then you see it what? Coming back to take over its lost territory. Coming back in many instances to expel the infidels and to expel the foreign elements from its midst. And yet making a mistake again of what? Letting them back in and having to fight the battle again and again. And entering into alliances with them, so at the end of its life, it's this betrayal by these white nations and by these Asian nations and by these so-called lords that they had appointed in the Delta that are betraying them and getting involved in intrigue that ultimately leads to its defeat and its destruction. Human errors. And the like of just pure heart sense in many instances, and seeing what is going on in the world and learning from history. To an extent, Egypt has some problem because its people were essentially unwarlike. Right? Oh yeah, it had to be. They were well protected by what? A desert, by an ocean, by what? A mountain range. The soil just grew luxuriously and everything. And so life was pretty good. And for a long time, it blocked the enemies out. And in a way then, the people did not have to develop the warfare and the warfare temperament in ways that other civilizations had to do so. And ultimately, because of that, they often suffered. Because believe me, they did not learn about war and cruelty until the Hyksos got a hold of them. Yes. Just like many Africans didn't learn about it until the Portuguese got a hold of them too. Yeah. Who taught them what cruelty meant and taught them what it means to really make war. But dig that African ingenuity, though. Once they found out about it, once they recognized it, once they saw the value of chariots and horses and military formations and so forth, what happened? They came back again. And they fought again. What do you see with the Roman army? Not its numbers, but its strategy, right? Its military what? formation, its ability to make a living fort and make that thing and build a square and use that square to decimate hundreds and thousands of its enemies, while its enemies are making what? Frontal and unorganized attacks against it. This is the same kind of military formation that's going to permit something like 300 or 400 Europeans to kill 10,000 or more African soldiers. Face the reality. Sometimes it's just that. Or the difference in a sword, a difference between iron and steel, the difference between the length of a spear. You see how Shaka changed the rules of warfare by just doing what? Changing the length of the assegai. Along with some other military psychology, study that psychology, excellent psychology. Deciding to step out of the tradition and look at it and say, hey, we got to change this. And looking at these soldiers and say, now you're going to live this way, and I'm going to toughen you up this way. And if I see a wound in your back, it meant you were running, so you're going to die. So you may as well die with one what? In your chest. The Roman had the same thing. The Roman rule was you should be more afraid of your commander than you are of the enemy. That's right. You get out of his sight, you get out of order in the ranks, you die. You run the gauntlet. We beat you. We behead you. It was there, set there. Military rules, strategy, formation, those things that were necessary. Because these are the things, unfortunately, that have been the basis of European and the basis of the survival of people. We see Ghana, of course, rising, as I mentioned earlier, but we see it too. Remember, being an empire over what? Other tribal groups. So there's always what I call a centrifugal force involved there. Of the tendency of the empire always to do what? Fly apart. That's why you have to have top-notch what? Administration. You have to have a top-notch political system. You have to have a top-notch intelligence gathering system. You have to have a way of paying your army and raising your armies. Now, when your empire grows too big for your army to control, that empire falls apart. We saw that to a great extent with the Ghanaian situation. We'll find it with the Malian situation as well. We also see, of course, what's happening in the Ghanaian situation. And yet now, ladies and gentlemen, we're talking about a civilization that lasted well over, what, 1,000 years. You know, no fly-by-night group you're dealing with. And really, if you count its full history, probably going on over 2,000 years. Certainly existing beyond the time when the last African Egyptian dynasty was still on the throne in Egypt. And yet we see then what is happening again, as Chancellor Williams points out again and again. The inculcation into its midst, what? Of foreigners. Into its midst, foreign religion. Kings who begin to say, out of expediency, I will become a Muslim. All right, let's deal with the reality. I know some of you don't want to deal with it. Yeah, out of expediency. Because remember, the whole African population is not Muslim. So that brings what? A seed of dissension where? Right into your society. The ruling class, the powerful group, the king is Muslim, and what? The population is still what? Non-Muslim. Problems there. Other groups outside, non-Muslim. Or other groups under your domination, what? Non-Muslim. Problems. Muslims controlling the caravans routes. Muslims having to be what? Bribed. Muslims controlling to a good extent some trade and so forth. And we call that expediency. But look at it very carefully. It was expedient for the Arabs, not for the Africans. It was expedient for them to say what? We will only trade with whom? Muslims. We will only give what? The Muslims the best deals and so forth. It worked for whose benefit? For the Arab benefit. And yet we have history of saying that African kings became Muslims out of what? Expediency. And we're going to watch that game because it goes right on down to today. Of people choosing other people's philosophies out of expediency. We see then the decline of Shanghai, and I won't go into all of that, but the thing that I want you to recognize as we review these things, of course, Shanghai becomes of some interest in the sense that its downfall, of course, while subject to the problem of all empires, whether black, green, yellow, blue, or what have you, and that is maintaining control through military means, through administrative means, through political means, the capacity to protect one's empire. And remember, you see, one of the other things that changes empires, of course, is technique. As I just mentioned, the change in formations, the change in religious strategy, in military strategy, changes in military weaponry can tip the balance toward in the favor of an enemy. And sometimes a society which has been great permits itself to become conservative and therefore does not change its military strategy, does not change its philosophies and so forth, and another people with a different philosophy, strategy, technique, and military approach overruns that society, even if the civilization is a what? A good one, quote unquote, as such. And we see that. So what do we see here with the decline of Shanghai? The Sultan of Morocco sending a force of 200 soldiers, seizing the salt deposits of Tagaza, armed with what so-called arquebuses, or what we call the musket. And now the gun is being introduced into African society. And this introduction of the gun and the weapon, of the rifle and so forth, is going to tip this balance greatly. Prior to this time, the African armies and the other armies could, and the imperial armies of Africa could withstand the onslaught of Europeans, and they did, century after century after century. And they were equal to the fighting valor of the other peoples. But with the introduction of these weapons, we see then the military situation changing. And these guns were to bring about profound changes. And we see then the people from Shanghai losing battle after battle against these weapons. I would recommend for you a reading of a book called The Tools of Empire by Hedrick. I can't recall his first name. An interesting one where he talks then about the effects of the rifle, the effects of the gun, particularly as it moved from the musket, which had to be loaded from its bore, from the upper end where the soldier had to stand up, and sometimes it took him a whole minute to load it and get it. You know, you've seen these pictures where they had to drop the powder in and drop the bullet in and drop, and tamp. And then you see, and so an army with a good bow and arrow cord could still do them in. And in fact, the accuracy of these weapons being smooth bored without the rifling on the inside of the chamber were very inaccurate. And some of them, they weren't accurate up to about 80 feet. And a good, strong bow was more accurate from a longer distance. But after a while, and many of them would just stop firing when they got wet. That would be the end of this, or when they had moisture and so forth. But technique, you see, begins to take place, doesn't it? The building of the metal cartridge, the breech loader, which really transformed warfare. Instead of having to stand up and push that powder down and the other stuff down in there, you load the bullet at the front, at the end of the gun nearest to the firing person. Very important, because it permits him to lay down, to hide out, to lay low in ambush, and to fire from a prone position. And as you rifle the inside of that barrel so that the bullet comes out spinning, you see, instead of tumbling in upon end and so forth, you increase the speed and you increase its effectiveness and its distance, so that when you could get a small group of men put into a Latin square and so forth with that kind of rifling and that kind of gun and wreak havoc on a bunch of people running with spears and assegais, as did happen. And then when you add on to that the machine gun, particularly the magazine gun, 3 or 4 of those could kill men by the thousands. And you have situations then of 400 and 500 Europeans killing Ashantis and other people in terms of thousands by the tens of thousands. technology and technique. Not they did. Now, the African tribes to develop the weapon too. And some even went as far as to send their locksmith, their blacksmith to Europe to try to learn that affair. You talk about Samori Touré, who sought to make weapons and sent his blacksmiths to Europe to learn the craft. To Woodrow's tried to do the same as well, but then you still had the factors operating there that you have now. The European armies, as they got new weapons, would do what with their old weapons? Sell them to the Africans. And actually what they did in many East Africans were importing weapons by the thousands, hundreds of thousands, particularly the West Africans and so forth. The only problem was that they were what? No good. Blow up in your face. Cheap. You see? Very. But it's the same thing the Europeans do today. That's right. When the Africans buy jet planes, they're not buying the whole thing. They are sold so-called what? Defensive weapons. A good part of the jet equipment is left off. The parts that will allow them to be offensive and to attack and so forth are not sold to them. You know what ultimately sold to them? The same thing that was sold to our African forefathers. Enough so that they could do what? Kill each other. Yeah. Or so some dictator like Mobutu or some of those other rascals over there could intimidate the population and rape and rob them in service to their European overlords. The game is a heavy one, and it continues. And I can see Chancellor Williams' frustration. When are we going to learn? When are we going to study that history and look at it for what it is? When are we going to get off this religious trip and look at the human factors involved in the rise and falls of human civilizations and grow and develop with that kind of knowledge? When are we going to get over the glorification bag and really look at the realities of things and develop our defense and our survival on the basis of reality? And recognize that we must get ready to challenge this European militarily, psychologically, politically, and in every other way possible, and that we are fully capable of doing it. We must look over and get over the God trip and recognize that there are human factors involved in the survival of a people. We recognize that the Spartans, as I mentioned earlier, trained all of their citizens, including the women, for military service. They started the boys out at age 7 and trained them for 13 years until 20. Were they through? No, they went right on into the Corps, where they stayed until what? Age 45. No 2-year terms for these guys. No 3-year terms for these. They were taught how to steal. That was part of the military training. Taught to be cunning, how to trick and play games on other people's names. Taught how to suffer and stand hardship. When the men of those women would be killed and destroyed in war, they were dared to cry. As a matter of fact, they had to walk around with smiles on their faces and see it as an honor to have their husbands and their sons destroyed in war. And they showed gladness. What a psychology. You understand? Training, education, instruction, control of their youth is what led to their survival and strength. For those 20 lived in military, so-called military messes, and they were only allowed to see their wives by stealth. They could get married, but they had to sneak out and catch it. You know, even had homosexuality in the ranks. You know, in this culture, people think homosexuals are weak, right? When you hang around an army for 45 years, and so what? The veterans got a hold to the young ones. But even that was used as a part of the esprit de corps. You talk about Alexander the Great. Right? What are we dealing here with again? Men with very strong what? Homosexual traits. Very much. A drunkard, alcoholic. Yes. Read reality, ladies and gentlemen. The Prussian army, the greatest war machine around. Again, see, ladies, it's not what you got, it's what you what? Do with what you got. How you use it. How to take it and make it work for you. And what? Not against you. Alexander's a terrible, miserable person. Right? Miserable. Killed, who was it, Aristotle's son? Aristotle, his teacher, for not bowing on the spot. In a drunken rage, ran his javelin through his major general, the son of his major general, and then killed the general so you wouldn't hear about it. Man roaming all over the earth, not knowing where the hell he was going. No real plan. Alexander the Great crying because he had no more to conquer. Come on. Read reality. Roaming everywhere because he had no real direction. The only thing he had was a military mind. A military mind taught to him by his general father Phillips. Taught to him from what? An early age, having him lead the cavalries and the army as a kid. Knew nothing else. These Spartans weren't even taught to read. They were only taught one thing, war. What am I saying? I'm not saying necessarily that we teach our sons that. The point I'm trying to emphasize is you get the characters that you what? You create. You get the sons that you make.
That's right.
You get the daughters that you make. You complain about black males being this and black males being that. And our men being weak and they ain't taking care of the family and they ain't and they fall into crack. Well, make another man. That's what you do. Tell it.
That's right.
You have the psychology. You have the history. You have the lessons before you. They're all there. You go to school and get degrees in psychology, human relations, social work, and you can't even shape your own people. That's right. Go to social work school and study a community organization, and you can't organize one community. Why? You studying people who've never organized the black community in their lives.
That's right.
That's right. Freud, Jung. Did those people ever organize the black community? Huh? Did they? Never. Why isn't your text on Marcus Garvey? You're talking about what? Human community organization. The man who organized the largest number of blacks ever been organized, right? Elijah Muhammad, Father Divine. Oh, those are the you don't bring those into your psychology. That's why you're defeated by it. That's why you're defeated by it. How did they organize for you? You say, right, you can't get black people to operate, you can't get black. Oh no, that's not true. We have great examples of black people cooperating. Hundreds and thousands of them. Investing, supporting. But we haven't looked at it. You let people sell your Father Divine as some cult figure. Well, he was some cult figure, and he was some... You don't look at how he fed thousands of people day after day during the Depression. You don't see how he organized money, and in the depth of a Depression, was able to buy real estate and to buy businesses and to employ his people and so forth, because you let people feed you an image that keeps you from looking at a man who, despite what you may see as his human error and so forth, still was able to accomplish something right in the teeth of the beast. Because in studying your sociology and your psychology, you don't look at the people who've been your sociology and your psychology. You get caught up in super niggerism. Yes, your leader's got to be as white as snow. He's got to be perfect. He's got to have no flaws. He got to be beyond human. And the whites know it. That's why Hoover would put a blot on King's reputation. Or they put a scandal on this one, or a scandal on that one. Because they know the people who need super niggerism to continue and to support them will do what? Back off. Because they cannot differentiate between the human qualities of their leader and between the realities that that leader represents and between the other positives that that leader represents, despite the fact that he may lay down with some girl somewhere. You're going to throw out the whole basis of national organization? You're going to throw out the whole principle of the fact that black people cannot survive unless they see themselves as a nation because some man laid down with a girl? You must recognize you got to get over it, or people will defeat you time and time again. It doesn't even have to be true. All they have to do is print it in the Daily News, and it's over. We look at Carthage. We don't have time to talk about that, of course. Again, the people who didn't even really have much soil, but who too are ultimately defeated by mercenaries and people they were paying off, and the armies turned around and you couldn't trust them, man. They give to the highest bidder. Often when you know these guys went to war and the army was fighting against another army, all the opposing army had to do was offer them more money. They turned around and fight on your side. Because we tend to think, the old times as being sacred, filled with what? Holy people. Come on, man. Human beings have been human beings. And you have to deal with it, for real. That empires then, but yet what do we see in Hannibal? Another man who is what? Trained in what? Childhood, boyhood, son of what? Generals, trained in warfare. Nobody was just a god looking over their shoulder and just handing them, victory free of charge. No, he had to train. The nation had to be positioned. The navies had to be set up. He tore Rome up, and he tore those people apart. He could have taken Rome had he had a mind to do so. Yes, but what? Training, learning, education. This is the thing that we must understand. So then, today's assaults are not against armies, but against minds. People are oppressed and destroyed through self-destruction. To be robbed of culture is not merely the result of bias, not merely the result of the bias of the European, nor the need of the European to inflate his ego. It was that, but it was not only that, an image, or to produce an inferiority complex, or just to justify slavery. But to be robbed of culture is to change the personality of a people, to exploit that people commercially, and ultimately to gear that people for self-destruction, to manipulate, to create the desires in people, and to manipulate those desires so that they can become used and commercially exploited. This is what this is about. We as a people are in the midst of the belly of the beast, and we must be very ingenious. And we can defeat this beast being right in the middle of it. A lot of you talk about running back to Africa, and I've told you the white man is there too. There's nowhere for you to run. You can run, but you can't hide from this European. He's all over the globe. And where you don't see him, you see him hidden behind a black face or some other face. You may as well meet him where you find him. You find him here, meet him here. He can be defeated here. There's no law that says he can't, but you got to get back your mind first. You got to get back the control of yourself. You got to look at that religion that has got a hold of you. That religion that had called a hold to Africans, called Islam. That religion that had called a hold to African Americans, called Christianity. Yeah, a lot of people think, you know, that our people were praying to God of coming over on the ships. Right? Wait a minute, black Africans were not Christians when they were brought over on that water. That's right. Come on, read your history now. And they were over on this side a pretty good while before they were taught what? Christianity. Okay? You understand? And who taught it to them? And for what reason? All right. You think he's going to teach you Jesus in such a way that it's going to defeat him? You think he's going to teach you to read that Bible in such a way that it's going to defeat him? I am not attacking the Bible, and I'm not attacking Jesus. I'm attacking people who use the Bible and use Jesus. And I'm attacking you if you take that teaching without examining it and turning it around. I'm not attacking Allah and the Quran. You can have Allah and you can have the Quran. But you got to get out of Arabism. Despite all of that, you know, I live in a neighborhood, and I see the mosque, and I see people dipping and bowing, fine. I see Pakistanis who don't even live in the neighborhood, and Lebanese and all other kinds of people in there, besides my African brothers in there. And then when I go to the construction near my house, I see those same Arabs and other people constructing houses for black people, and I don't see my African brothers constructing those houses. And I walk into my neighborhood of Harlem and other places, and I see those Arabs and those other Muslim brothers owning the neighborhood and not African people. Don't come telling me all Muslims are the same, just as all Christians are not the same. And you recognize what is going on here. Yes, sir. People who teach you religion in such a way that it works for them. And you see it in the funeral of Yusuf the other day. Cut down. We've almost run out of numbers, counting the number of black men cut down by these white folks. I think we passed 200 and something. Headed up to 300, right? Reverend Daughtry keeps those statistics. Never again. Now you know better and they knew better. You know they're going to shoot them down again. Come on. They did it before. You hollered before. Never again. 3 weeks of agitation. That's right. When I bought pizza.
Make it plain.
Yeah. Turn right around and buy everything from the white man tomorrow. So he can purchase a weapon to shoot your sons down in the street. In the name of Christianity. Those same Christians you claim to be your brothers and sisters shooting your son down in the street. Beating them up. Apparently that Christianity is not what you got. Didn't stop them from shooting Indians down by the hundreds and thousands. Didn't stop them from praise the Lord and pass the bullets. That's right. That's right. Didn't stop them from there. It's not the religion. It's the purpose for which the religion is used by people in power. Believe me, if you work that religion and you work that Christianity right, it'll make you prosperous just like those white folks. That's right. If you work that Islam right, it'll bring you into power just like those Arabs. But it's got to be yours. And it's got to be your relationship to God, not a hand-me-down, second-handed relationship. But when you let somebody else, and you have to be, and this is not only religion, by the way, you atheist. Yes. That's right. You're going to get tired too. Don't think you're getting away because you don't believe. Oh yeah, because you go run into Marx. Yeah, and all other sundry European philosophies. You know. And you see Africans today killing each other, fighting over what? European philosophies. Yeah. One is either under the allies or what? The Russian. And the other one is what? Under the United States. One is fighting for democracy, the other one is fighting for scientific socialism. And they're all doing what? Dying. That's right. If you are really equal to Marx, then think of your own philosophy. Rationalize your own political development. You don't need to have to go and copy this thing blindly. Because I tell you what, when you get a philosophy, whether it's religious or non-religious or non-secular, and yet you let other people teach you that philosophy against your reality, against your history, against your destiny, that philosophy and ideology, whether Christian, Muslim, atheist, or what have you, is going to serve those people. The Marxists can't get rid of white people in their midst. Because what? Marxist ideology forbids you to do so, doesn't it? Yeah. So you're caught up with coalitions. You're caught up with white folks sitting in the heart of your meetings. You're caught up with betrayal and so forth. And yet the only way you can get yourself together is to keep these people out and talk heart to heart and deal with yourselves in terms of reality. But this is what happens. And you know what happens when you borrow somebody else's ideology, whether secular or non-secular? They see themselves as the validators of the philosophy. So they'll tell Elijah Muhammad, well, your Islam is not real Islam. It doesn't let white folk in. It doesn't let this in. It doesn't let the Arabs in. This and so forth and so on. But what did he say? It is what? Black Muslim. What? Blackness. Designed for whom? For us. It is not enough to merely serve the religion, but the religion does what? Serves us as well. When God, if you want to call it that, entered into a covenant with Israel, it was a two-way street. Isn't that what it was? Yes, it wasn't a mere dictation to Moses of what the people were supposed to do. Go and read it again. I say you see a what? A negotiation process taking place there. And what did it say? What? You do this and what? I'll do that. You do this and I'll what? Serve you. That's religion, ladies and gentlemen. Not a one-way street. A God that's what? Serves his people and serves her people as what? As those people do what? Serves their God. What kind of God is it that can only take? Can only keep you in hell? It has to be the wrong covenant. It has to be the wrong relationship. If you're worshiping a God, then all you're doing is catching hell. When all you're doing is what? To think, to create, to see reality, to weigh and measure, to do mathematics, to do science, to do economics. How dare you ask me to use it? Yeah, that's what some of our people are literally doing today. And then they think God is obligated to do what? Take care of it. You got another thought coming. You have to use what God gave you. I'm writing now a philosophy, an ideology on black crime. And I'm looking at European psychology and how we are deceived by that psychology. I'll just give you a little fraction of what I'm doing. We deal in psychology with something called projection. You know, many of you, been in the psych classes, you've heard of that, They talk about the ego defense mechanisms, right? You know, how the ego defends itself through denial and repression, rationalization, reaction formation. You might have made an A on that one, didn't you? Hey, see, Negroes are caught up in this thing called equal education. There's no such thing. I keep telling you, there's no such thing as equal education. Black people throw that term out of your mind. Then you really start educating your children. There's no such thing. No such thing as sane education. No way. You get out of education what you bring to it. You get out of education where you're going. I've told you before, the destiny of the white child is conservative, to keep what it has and to get more of it. The destiny of the black child by its very nature is what? Revolutionary. That implies two different sets of what? Education. That means the black child must be educated to overthrow European power. It must be educated to feed those hungry children they show on that TV set. That means you don't give them the same education. That means you don't rear them in the same way. That means you don't give them the same values. Get rid of that. That's going to kill you. These European books will kill you if you do not know how to read them correctly. Call it the same education. You get up there and you're taking these doggone tests, which is another thing you ought to get rid of and stop subjecting your children to, these so-called achievement tests. Yes, because you haven't answered the question yet. Who told you they had to read the same thing at the same time, at the same age? Who told you that? Why? Who said that? Who told you that, as I said before, that a class day has to last from 8:30 to 3 o'clock? Why can't it go to 7 or 8? Why can't it be on Saturdays? Why can't it be throughout the summer? Huh? There's no standard education. There's education people decide that is appropriate for their survival. That's what it is. And we must see that as it is. Here you're grumbling about being enslaved and what that did to you. Being Jim Crow and what that did to you. Being discriminated against and what that did to you. Being insulted and what that did to you. And then you say, I want my child to be reading at the same point at the same time without the white child who's dealt with none of this. Who has none of these scars when they come into the classroom. Who have none of these traumas when they come in. And when they don't read at the same time, oh, they must be reading disabled. We got to give them special ed. And you got to give them all these funny and stupid tests and insult them even more and do less for them. When I say it doesn't mean that they have to read. They can read ahead of black children. I'm not rationalizing them coming behind them. But you got to cut this thing loose to get ahead first. You see? You got to recognize. You got to look and say, what has the European stolen from the character of African people? You see? That the enslavement period was a stealing of black people's minds. That job discrimination is not merely cutting a person off from income. It is cutting a person off from the cognition and thought patterns that are part of doing that job. And therefore, people who are not engaged in jobs that deal with organization and development and research and thinking and so forth cannot transfer those abilities and skills to their children. So therefore, job discrimination is merely then not the robbing people of their wealth, but robbing them of their minds. And you have to understand that. So years and years of discrimination and years of servitude and years of insults and so forth have been set up to twist the thinking capacities of black children and of black people. So that even when you put them in school with little white boys or little white girls, they still have trouble. And when they have trouble, then you begin to question their genes. Oh, they are smart, very smart. They learn to be conditioned very rapidly and very early. Black people do what? Learn to be dumb. Yes, you learn to be dumb just like you learn to be smart. That's right. When you get punished for being smart, when you don't get paid for being smart, when you're psyched and saying that you're not smart, what do? You learn what? Not to be smart. It's conditioned, built in, and it's there. You got to look at that. What did we say in our last thing here? That if you want to get money out of a Negro, insult him first. Right? We buy from people who insult us, don't we? Oh yeah, they insulted us how it would be till we bought people. No economic development came out of this situation here with you, sir. How much real political and social organization is going to come out of that experience? How many people tried as hard as they could not to hand over that money to these people and set up another alternative system? Huh? How much was it talked about during the funeral or afterwards and so forth? And yet we see what is going on here, ladies and gentlemen. So we have to look. What do we mean then? The Negro is insulted about his African physiognomy, thinking and believing, as the European told him, that he is not naturally beautiful, being 12% of the population buying 40% of the cosmetics. But keeping the whole, industry alive. One after the other. Why? Buying from people that who? Hate you and insult you. But it's the getting over of the insult that is the motive for buying, isn't it? Right? I'll show these white folk I can wear a suit like they can. You'll go in and throw my money around too. Do like Mike Tyson. I showed him I could buy a Ferrari on a credit card. Fools. Did he gain respect? No. Foolish. Foolish. And someone said, did the Koreans march in your parade? Did the Arabs march in your parade? Did these other people eating you up and eating you alive economically march and protect you? How many Roman Catholic priests marched in your parade? How many white Baptists and Southern preachers marched in your parade? How many of those other Christians in white was marched in your parade? Check yourself out. See what the heck is going on. And see what kind of game is going on here. So what do we have here then? An African mind that has been twisted. And what did I say then? That every maladjustment that you find in the African personality, when you trace it back, has a what? An economic function. You look at it. Lack of self-confidence takes you out of economic competition. The inability to get along with each other takes you out of economic competition. The inability to be reliable and trustworthy in relationship with one another takes you out of competition. Your fear to take risks and to venture into new enterprises takes you out of competition. You're getting a high when you spend money with the enemy means that you don't spend money with your friends. And you don't feed your own children. And you can go in one personality defect and maladjusted characteristic after another, and you will see that they function economically and politically to support your oppressor. When you look at them very closely then, when you recognize that your children have problems with abstract thinking and so forth, you're going to see that that serves economic functions as well. When you look then at what's missing in your children, then you know what kind of education they must have. When you look at the destiny that your children have, and it's going to be this generation upon which the black nations are going to live or die. And when you look at that destiny, then you know what kind of education you have to offer. And you recognize that it is diametrically opposed to the education of the European child. But you have to see it. We talked about projection. Projection, it said, is the projection of one's own unwanted and negative characteristics onto another person. And pretending that those characteristics are what? Not one's own, but are in the other individual. And in that way, the person can deny that he has those characteristics in himself. And in that way, he can attack the other person, or call himself defending himself against the other person as a way of defending himself against his own bad characteristics. Projecting. Nice little definition, isn't it? Psychologically profound. Right? Isn't it? So the European, being the criminal that he is, right? The greatest murderer the earth has ever known. The greatest robber and rapist the world has ever seen. The greatest disrespecter of the earth. The greatest despoiler of nature. And you look at every step he made in every other nation, and you see people dying and exploited and killed and destroyed, and he has a nerve to define criminality. A nerve to call himself civilized. And has a nerve to be held up as being normal. And have these other people out here thinking of themselves as pathological. But that's the only way it can be, ladies and gentlemen, when a little romp of a people rule the whole of the other people. That's the game that's got to be played. So what do? To hide their own criminality, to hide their own lowliness, to hide their own savagery, they do what? Project it upon other people and say, no, it is not we who are what? Savage and criminal and murderous and all of these other things. It's what? The other guy. And to really pull it off, the other people have got to do what? Believe it. And when they believe it, they're had. Yeah. And now we get on and discuss black criminality. Yeah. Crime in the black community and so forth. And we don't discuss crime in the white community. We do not discuss the United States as a criminal society, a gang of thieves, and capitalism as rationalized thievery. We don't look at it that way. We don't dare look at it that way. But the things that struck me when I looked at this thing in terms of projection was that neutral appearing definition. You know, projection is the expelling out or putting out of one's own negative characteristics upon another as a way of defending one's own ego and image. Nice. Very nice. Then you think back on it for a minute, you know. Because in that way it makes all projectors equal, doesn't it? Then you can say, well, black folk project and white folk project. Everybody projects. You know, just like some of these Negroes, racism is in all of us. Well, I know black people who talk about white folk. You know, and that somehow justifies, you know, that somehow, you know, supposed to let these others off the hook. Foolish. Even Matt Bainey came up with some stupid stuff in the New York Times. How many saw that? The blight of black racism. I mean, that's foolish. Very stupid. And what is he saying? Well, you know, I hear some black folks saying something bad about white folk. That means they just as racist as white folk. He doesn't even know what racism is. He thinks racism is merely an expression of an attitude. Merely saying something bad about another people. Merely saying, I hate white folk. That's not racism, ladies and gentlemen. You think because I say I hate white folk, that's the same as Bush saying he hates black folk? That's the same as the Supreme Court saying it hates black folk? That's the same as a cop saying he hates black folk? You got another thought coming. But people who study superficial sociology come away with that kind of stupidness. And they look at attitudes. Racism is far more than an attitude. I'm going to tell you, you're still going to be catching hell when the white folks stop saying they hate you. That's right. When they remove their overt hatred and they remove their overt antipathy towards you, you're still going to catch hell. Because racism is not only contained in the attitude and words of a people, it is contained in the total system. It is contained in the total ideology. Your destiny has to be revolutionary. Even if the white folks stop calling you a nigger tomorrow, you'll still be in trouble. Because all of that preparation during slavery and all the other things, it was like I was telling the sister one night here, even if the white man's courts were fair, black men would still do what? Go to jail. And you have a peculiar phenomenon that the more black judges you get on the court, the more black men go to jail. So you think getting black judges on the court is going to stop your boys from going to jail? You got it wrong. You got another thought coming. It's not going to do it. Because in a fair trial, that calls a criminal a real criminal, right? Or at least indicts a person for performing what we call the criminal act. If it's fair, then the person who's done it is still going to do what? Go to jail. Right? So in a system, though, that's organized in such a way that it creates criminality in black males to a very great proportion, it's still a system that's going to, even with this court being fair, do what? Send black men to jail. You got to go deeper than fair trials. Yeah. You got to go deeper than just mere liberalism. Racism is more than just an attitude. It's more than just saying bad things about people. It's very deep, and it's ground into it. As a matter of fact, the white man is letting up off of you calling you bad names so often now because he's worked the system so well. Yeah. And now applies neutral, egalitarian systems across the board. And therefore, when you get the psychological definition, right, a projection, you assume one person's projection is equal to another person's, don't you? If one person is throwing his negative characteristics off on the other one, and the other one is throwing his negative characteristics, oh, they're doing the same thing. They're no different one from the other. They both projecting. Lies. Because the effect of projection depends on the nature of the power relationship between those people. The projection of a child's mother is different from the child's projection on its mother. Understand? The fact that that child is dependent and weak and is on and depends on the mother's or father's authority means that when that mother or father projects itself on that child is far more influenced than the child's projections upon the mother. And therefore, even though they may be mechanistically doing the same thing, the effect of what they're doing is vastly different. So therefore, when a black man projects what he wants to do on a white man, it is not the same thing as the white man projecting on the black man because of the difference in what? The power. The projection by the person of power, the projection by the people of strength is an act of creation. You must understand that. It's not merely calling bad names, but it actually involves what? The creation of a personality in the other individual. Because the more powerful projector has also the capacity to follow his projection up with concrete activities, with concrete relationships, with job discrimination, with shooting sons in the street, with beating them with policemen, with controlling money, with controlling the other things. That projection becomes a creative process, not merely a throwing out of images upon another. That projection then becomes the implantation into the breast of the projectee of a foreign and alien spirit. And that spirit takes over the personality of that one who receives it. Just as to a good extent the child's personality is organized by the relationship it has with his parents and with other authority figures in the society. And what do we mean then by alienation? We mean by alienation a situation where an alien spirit, an alien ideology, an alien perception, an alien outlook on life has inculcated itself within the breast of a people, and that alien spirit identifies itself as the self and the ego of that person and manipulates that individual's taste desires so that they will serve the interests of the people who put it in there in the first place. You have to see that. We talk about self-hatred, but the self you hate is not the real self. That's right. That African self you think you hate, that's the self put in you by the white man. That's the description put in you by the European. That is not what Africa is. That is not what to be African means. Not at all. You're running away from that. And you know, when you run away from that, you go deeper into insanity. That's right. You're insane, first of all, by having a foreign spirit in you. And then you become more insane running from that, calling it yourself. That's right. Yeah. Doubly crazy. Yeah. I'll wrap it up in a second. Doubly out of your mind. You haven't even had time to see the African self yet, because it's hidden behind the fake image. And you're frightened of that image, and you run away from it because you got to go through it. You got to go through the valley of the shadow of death That's right. You got to be born again, isn't that what they tell you? You got to let that old European spirit and alien spirit in you die. You think it's yourself. You think if you let it die, you are dying. Nah, that's when you come alive. That's right. That's right. That's right. You have to look at it. You haven't seen that self yet, because boy, when you grab a hold of that real African self, and that real African self gets to you, ain't no way you can turn it loose. There's no reason to hate it. You know you can't hate it. No. No way. No way. How can you hate your real self? How can you escape from reality? And escape from reality is an escape into madness. Yeah. A lot of these people out here are going crazy and on dope and other things because they escape into something they think is their self. You know that? I don't like being black. I don't like... What? You mean the black that the people have told you what it means. The African that the people have described to you. You see, that's not who you are. That's not what you are about. I was looking here at multiple personalities. I forgot to bring the thing. I wanted to read it to you a little bit here on multiple personalities. It's very, very instructive. Very instructive. You know, where people can have 2 or 3 personalities at once, and one comes forward and the other one goes, you know, you can have all kinds of combinations. And it shows you, see, that the human mind is capable of being fragmented and reorganizing itself and restructuring itself. The interesting thing, though, about these personalities is to watch the fact that each personality has a body that goes with it. You know? In other words, you can have the same apparent body, but when each personality is in control of that body, the body chemistry changes very drastically. Yes. So when one personality is in control, for instance, they did one experiment where one personality being in control, the person drank orange juice and broke out in hives. Itches. The body just broke out all over. When that personality left and another one came in, the hives did what? Disappeared. Disappeared. You got the same body, but you really don't have the same body, do you? One personality, when it was in, had perfect eyesight. When that personality left, the person had to put on glasses. One person had 2 or 3 sets of glasses for each personality. That's right. I'm telling you, it's amazing. One could take 50 milligrams of a tranquilizer and be cooled out. Under the other personality, 100 milligrams couldn't cool him out. Changes, terrific changes in total body. So when you're possessed by an alien spirit, you're not just possessed by an idea, you're not just possessed by an abstraction, you're possessed by something that is incarnated in your body, that will change your body chemistry, that will change your brain chemistry, that changes your personality, that changes your perception of the world and of yourself, that changes your intelligence, that changes the whole way you relate to the world. It changes your appetite. You like one thing under one personality and can't stand it under the other. So therefore, when another people introject a personality into you, when they introject words and a concept into you, nigga, it's just not a label, it's a full descriptive. And these words and these descriptions are related and associated with each other. So when the person accepts the label, he accepts the total descriptive thing, and when those words get into the brain, they're incarnated and coordinate the chemistry and physics of the body, so the person acts like a nigger.
That's right.
That's what it's about. So when the mother is projecting on the child, or the father is projecting on the child, and authority is projecting on the child, and the child is believing in their word and taking their word for truth, and taking them to be the definers of reality, and taking them to be definers of what is real, that child is being transformed, and those words are not just sounds in his head. Those words organize brain chemistry and organize the body. And when those parents and other people hate that child, that child will proceed to kill itself in service of the spirit within it. The black man being hated and suffering from a death wish by the white man is obliging the white man by killing himself. Because that alien spirit, once it possesses your body, does not give a damn about your body. Its appetites are appetites created by other people. And it's going to have the appetites that supports them economically and socially. It's going to have the desires that supports them economically and socially. Even when you know better, you still find yourself going to get it. And it's going to destroy you. And it kills you. This is what we call alienation. And so what we recognize in a large part of our people then is an alienation and the implantation of a foreign spirit. And that spirit has to be gotten out. The problem is so many people call that themselves. Well, that's just me. What can I do about it? That's the way I want. No, get off of it. That's not you. No, sir. You weren't put here to kill yourself. You weren't put here to overdose on crack and coke. You weren't here to do your body in. Don't tell me that. You can't love yourself and love your body and destroy it at the same time. No way. There has to be something existent in there. So then what we would recognize then with the projection. Now, and see, this is how you have to study black psychology, you see. You just can't go in there and read their European book. You got to say, okay, this is projection. Now let me put this in the context of power. Let me put it in the context of group dynamics. Right? Then you begin to see other things. So the European is going to teach you on an individual level, because individualism is this trump card. That's the Trump one. That's the one that protects his civilization more than anything else. You out there picketing Koreans who slap black women and so forth, and what's the first thing a Negro takes? I spend my money where I want to. Nobody can tell me where to spend my money. Individualism, rising up in defense of the European. Rising up in the destruction of their own children. These people hiring none, taking their money out of the community, disrespecting them, doing everything. And what do they have to say about it? I spend my money where I want it. What makes you want to spend it here then? You see? This is but I tell you, when you have an introjected, implanted spirit, that spirit in defending itself, when you think you're defending yourself, defends the person that created it and put it in you. That's why when you get through making the arguments for doing what you're doing, it's still going to end up with money in the pockets of white folks. That's right. Yes, okay. I'm telling you now. Yeah, because you're going to rationalize in terms of individualism and you watch all those ideologies float right out of Europeanism, paying no attention to your real economic circumstances, no attention to the future you got to deal with, no attention to your past, just putting up a rational argument. It's not even you arguing, is it? No, it's the spirit using your mouth and flapping your gums. That's all it is, I'm telling you. You're just listening in on the spirit. I'm telling you, that's all. Calling it yourself. You have no control over that spirit that's got you. You know it. That's right. And it comes through, you see, projection. The white man criminality, having to turn the other world into criminality. And you go into these schools and colleges and learn these so-called neutral definitions. When I tell my people here, when you read about that Skinner box, what did I tell you? Put yourself in the position of what? The rat. The rat, not the man that's controlling the rat, and you come closer to your reality. That's right. When you get through reading all those phony words and neutral words and look at them in terms of a political relationship between that rat and the man, and you say that man is able to control and condition that rat because that man has what? Power to do so. Because he has control when that rat eats and when the rat sleeps. its water and its food and the conditions under which it lives. But you see, if you just left with the rat and the way they give it to you, you come out of there dumber than a doornail, thinking you know something. That's right. So that even highly educated black people never learn to read. That's right. No, you don't learn to read. You read into something. You see, they set you up and then you just read the setup into the words. Or you don't what? Go beyond the words. Oh, you read the Times and everything, but you don't say, wait, now let me put it in what? My context.
That's right.
You see, my historical experience, where I want to go with it. And boy, when you do that thing, just break out all over, man. Your mind just expands. You can't hold it sometimes. The creativity and the knowledge burst open. I tell you, when black people get their minds right, this world is, we're going to sweep this world. I tell you. Yes, sir. I see white men coming up with ideas that if we'd been out of our right minds, we could have thought of 10, 20, 50, 25, 30 years ago. Yeah, I see them every day coming out with new sociological thought. When in the context where we were as black people, I could show them where I had written the doggone things 15 years ago. Oh, you got somebody out here hollering about what addiction is and so forth. And I was telling my brothers we came over that knew long ago that you have to look beyond crack addiction. Right. That you're looking at the wrong thing when you let people just focus you in on crack. When you don't look at the process of addiction itself. Right. And look at it closely. When you don't ask the question, what is the pusher addicted to? Because he has an addiction in the first place. And then his addiction comes into the addiction of the other person. What does the pusher want? What is he trying to get? Why does he think your child's life is worth the whole piece of car? Why does he think the disruption and the destruction of the black community is worth a gold chain? Somebody has fooled him into thinking that he is a real character and a real person by hanging around garbage and hanging garbage around his neck. And you know who that is? The pillars of the society. Bush, the greatest pushers of all. Trump, the greatest pushers of all. The white middle class, the greatest pushers of all. But they can't deal with it because they would have to indict their whole culture with it. That's right. Yeah. They'd have to transform the whole system. And they're not going to, so they what? Focus in. Focus in. And they got us focusing in. And we are going to sanction the killing of our sons and the incarceration of our people and the military occupation of our communities because we will not get that mind out of our bodies. So I'll bring you to a close here. Let me just point out one thing about the projection right quick because I want to get back to this religion for a second. Not only then does the projector project the evil things in their character on the victim, but strangely enough, the projector projects morality on the victim as well. Yeah, very interesting. They project a moral code as well. You know, when somebody tells you you're evil because you're black, you assume that you'd be better if you were what? White. You know? So in a sense, the put down can be a lesson in what? The other things. Oh, well, if I work this, if I work that, if I act this way and act that way, I'd be good. So in a sense, when the person puts you down, in another way, they're inculcating at the same time an ethical system. You okay? When not only do they teach you an ethical system backwards, but they teach it straightforward, don't they? Right? They come right in with that Bible. They come right in with the Quran. The white plantation man gives permission for the slave to be taught what? Christianity. Now, do you think he's going to give permission if that Christianity is going to overthrow his role in the world? You will see discussions in the magazines of the time about how Christianity would, what, be a more efficient controller of the African slave and people. Why is that the case? It is the case because when the projector projects the moral system, he projects that moral system for the same reason he projects the evil one, doesn't he? And what is that reason? Control. Control. So his moral system becomes your what? Conscience. Right? Now we got a real game going on here. Yes, sir. There's no accident why the white man came both with guns and what? And the Bible. That the Arabs come to take slaves and bring the what? The Quran. No accident there, because both of them, his weapons and other means to steal the slave is going to take advantage of you, and the way he teaches that religion is going to take advantage of you. Because this thing is going to work against your common sense. As soon as you say, this man has kicked my butt, he's taken everything I had, he's gotten my wealth, I ought to take it back, what happens? The old verse jumps up and says, what? Thou shalt not steal. You know, hey now, look at this funeral the other day. This boy shot down. Isn't it interesting? I thought it was ironic. Shot down, murdered. Now what would the natural instinctual response would have been? Let's go and do something about this. Or let's rearrange our community in such a way, economically, socially, politically, militarily, you know, in such a way that this will not happen again, that the white man will not have this power. No, be angry, but sin not. It must have been something for Cuomo and Koch and the rest of them to be sitting up there watching those Negroes with that implanted religion, having their anger and their revolutionary fervor being destroyed in the name of the same religion they gave it to them. Yes, and this is what happens. When you take foreign ideologies and you do not transform those ideologies in terms of your own reality, in terms of your destiny, in terms of where you want to go, and get your own relationship to God so that that God can work for you. This is what happens. They're going to kill you on one hand, and you're going to block yourself morally from doing anything about it on the other. This is what happens. And this is why you pray to the same God. This is why you dip to the east and so forth, but somehow that God you pray to and these other people seem to be giving everything else to the other people, and you get nothing. You have to do it yourself. You have to re-examine your relationship. You have to look at your mind. You have to see what kind of spirit is in your body and recognize that you are due an exorcism. That this must be taken out. Our men and our boys and our girls are out here on crack because they have developed impulsive personalities, hysterical personalities. I don't have time to talk with you about it today. Maybe in the next session we'll talk about what that means. See, the European puts it right in your face. Right in your face, and you can't see it. Right there. I mean, sometimes I think they're even talking about us in code. You know what I'm telling you? Sometimes when I read the works of Freud and Jung and some others, it's like, you know, we're not going to say it directly, but this is the way you get it. When you look at that ego and superego, you can look at it in another way and see it as a political program. A very beautiful political program is what it is. Why is the person impulsive? Why is the person hysterical in the sense that they just run after the loudest music and the prettiest colors and things like that? That's built in. Why is that the case? Why is it that they do things knowing better? You see. And it's there. Because, you see, ladies and gentlemen, we all have impulses. We all have desires. We all have hunches. But it's not enough to have those things. Those hunches and those impulses must undergo critical analysis. They must undergo intellectual analysis. They must be measured against long-term goals. They must be measured against morals to see if you want to indulge in them or not, right? They must be measured against love for your family. They must be measured against love for your race and your group. You must say, if I indulge in this, will this hurt my mother? Will this hurt my father? Will it destroy my sisters? Will it destroy my brothers? Will it destroy my race? That's why you measure impulse. And therefore, when you got that love of race, and you got the love of mother, and you got the love of daddy, you got the love of sister and brother, you got the love of the culture, you got the rationale of the culture, you got the ideology of the culture, you're in agreement with the survival of the people. You can't give in to foolish and stupid impulses. You control them. You inhibit them. But when you're robbed of a culture, when you're robbed of a love for self, when you're robbed of a love for your people and a love for your family, when you're given some old neutral, no-good ideology that has no connection one to the other, you're going to fall subject to impulses. And why was this done? So you could be the world's greatest hog and pig and eat up anything the other society decides to want to poke in your face. And this is what it's about. Yes. The only thing left then is to seek after what? Pleasure. Because you have no goals. You have no culture that you want to sustain, no family you want to sustain, and so forth. So what is left? And that spirit then, and to more effectively manipulate a people, you lay them in. Now you see, these writers don't even lay the religion game on you too much anymore, do they? No, because that's holding back too much commerce. So what do you lay in on them now? We lay in on them what we call expectation. Keeping up with the Joneses thing now, right? Well, the other kids come with a sheepskin coat. I got to have a sheepskin coat, a peer psychology. You see? So and how you're supposed to act and how you're supposed to look and all that's no longer even related to superficial religion. It's now related to what's happening. And therefore those people, then they haul out what? The stars and the others who define what's happening and what? Manipulate desire and manipulate pleasure and manipulate people. But it can only be done to a people who have what? No culture, no love of self, no true identity. Ladies and gentlemen, it comes down to the same thing, and it comes down to it again. Know and love your African self. Thank you very much.
Brothers and sisters, we ask you not to leave yet. We will have a brief question and answer period. Okay. Pause. Appreciate your attention, but at the same time, I'm certain that the brother is not just interested in your recognition. He's not interested in merely your appreciation. I'm certain that the brother would like to see you do, see you study, see you think, see you analyze. So hopefully you have not just come to merely hear words or merely to be entertained, but to take the information that he has shared with us and to use it for the benefit of yourself, your family, and our community. Okay. The brother is very analytical, and I'm sure he would like to see us, he expects to see us develop those same skills. I'm not certain if I should call him Reverend Amos Wilson, though, right? Okay, just a few announcements. We're going to, right now, do the 50-50. There were tickets being sold.
And you have to, I don't know whether I think we're more in the process of developing this, and whether we can find one that's labeled is different. Is difficult at this time, even though a good deal of, I believe, the ideology is projected by Elijah Muhammad, and of course Marcus Garvey, and others that have gone before us can be used to rationalize this approach and to actually prove the support. You can through very pertinent questions and pointed questions begin to get them to question. One of the things I think is very important in this regard is if you can begin to get the person to question assumptions that have not been questioned before, to get them to look at ideas and concepts and labels and approaches that they have taken for granted, and keep pushing them until they would have to re-examine those concepts and look at them in a new light as such. And of course, obviously, you keep pointing out to them the consequences of their behavior and pointing out the very concrete realities as what is happening in the community, to themselves as individuals, and to the African people as a whole. In other words, you have to hit them with reality again and again and again, and then be prepared, once if you can break through that, to show them the Afrocentric ideology, the re-identification with African culture, mores, and values as the way out of that particular problem and a way out of the kind of situation that they find themselves in. Hopefully, if you can get them to listen that long, you can try to demonstrate to them, not in as technical terms as I did tonight, of how they are set up and being made dupes for another people and being used and have no real will of their own as such. But it's something that we yet, as like people, not even as psychologists or whatever, just as people, must continue to work out and codify, bring together into a system of thought so that it can be used very effectively by our people. Sort of goes back to my Moses example and other examples of where when you have people falling apart, dissension and other things happening, it becomes necessary to rearrange the ethical system, moral and other kind of system to bring about change. Anyone else? Yes.
At one time, I was considered the country of the world.
Yes.
Because of the oil.
Yes.
This was really found to be an advocate side of food.
And the reason why I cannot tell you is because you're talking, I believe, about something that requires creative thinking and innovative thinking. And that means that when that occurs, or before it occurs, we must have trained ourselves, we must have the confidence in ourselves and the capacity to believe that we can arrive at the appropriate answer. You understand? And this is not a cop-out per se, because it's just no way that you can know all answers ahead of time. And I certainly can't know all answers ahead of time. We cannot know all answers ahead of time. However, what is necessary for us to do is to put ourselves in a state of mind so that once we weigh and measure and gauge what the reality of the situation is, we can then arrive at an answer and an appropriate approach, you see. So the thing that I'm mainly concerned with is not so much laying out answers ahead of time, or pat answers, or pat approaches, because the situation that you imply is what? Too volatile and labile. So what I'm really concerned with is developing an African mind that says, okay, they did that, or they're doing this, they did it in Trinidad, the people in Trinidad suffered because of this. Hey, if they had done it this way, you see, then they could have blocked this or so and so. That's the reason why I was talking about history tonight, right? That we look at the mistakes and the other things of our forefathers and study them very carefully so that when we're confronted again with similar issues, we have a stock of knowledge and information, and we've also sharpened our minds with the capacity to think and to be creative. And I believe, I have total faith that we can come up with something. We can come up with that answer. So I'm not really that hooked up on the answer, because I think sometimes what happens, and what has happened in our past society, sometimes people clung to old answers, you know, and clung to tradition in the face of new realities. And it becomes kind of dangerous for the answers to be laid out too early or too pat, because then people will take them for gospel. And you can see again when we talked about the tools of empire, the African need to change its military arrangement in the face of European firepower, the possibility of still defeating European firepower through guerrilla warfare, you see, rather than what? The old frontal assault, and this is the way our fathers have been doing it kind of thing, warfare. So I'm not going to make a prescription for the answer. Only thing I'm going to say is, let's build in the flexibility of our minds. Let's build in the belief in the power of our capacity. Let's study the errors, the human nature of our ancestors, not only of those, but of the enemy as well, and other civilizations. And from that, I believe we will come up with the answer. We will solve these problems. Money, I talked about money as one way, but certainly there are other ways of dealing with it. Perhaps we may decide not to use money at all, right? It is possible that if African people all of a sudden just stopped all over the world and decided they wouldn't cooperate with the system, that they could collapse the European economy in 2 weeks. You know what I'm saying? Just stop. Let it go. Fall in it, it'll fall right in. But again, you see, like I say, once that alien personality is hooked in there, that keeps saying, what, I need this car, I need that, I need this, and those kind of things, by which then we continue to buy the products, by those things we think we can't live without, we in a sense finance our own oppression. And that we need, I have suggested among some people that we as nationalists really call a conference on money. You know, the whole conference will be just about money. Because I think we as African people have still not come to terms with where money is or is not in our lives. We're still suffering from a trauma in relationship to money. Many of us don't think we even have the right to have it, you know, and these kind of things. Many of us, because we were sold in a capitalist system, have problems with wealth and stuff like that. And I think it's very important that we at some point really just deal with the concept of money. Where does it fit? It does not fit, or whatever. What other alternative economic systems exist other than the one that we are in? So when as I talk to you today, I'm not necessarily sold on the U.S. way of doing things. Not by a long shot. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
If I'm missing you right, you were a critic of Marx and Lenin and the capitalist system. Okay, when you're doing economics. And as I suggest, what are some of the things in your critical analysis that we, African community, should be really, then we go again with protection again, really focusing to really make ourselves become more viable?
I see. What I'm really looking at, because I'm not really going into point-by-point analysis of Marx and Lenin, the main thing I'm dealing with, I pointed out with the lecture, is this taking in of ideologies unexamined, you see, and taking in ideologies without measuring them against one's own reality and history, you see. Personally, there are a number of things that Marx talks about, many things, and Lenin talks about, and critiques that they make of capitalism that I am in agreement with, very much. But I have arrived at that agreement through my own intellectual process, you see. Of us arriving at the same point. And I can say, okay, or else I can look at their ideology and say, hey, When I talk about alienation, I studied Marx's concept of alienation. To a good degree, there's a good deal about his concept of alienation that I like. But then I see that there are other things, given my own experience, that must be added into that equation. Just as you see when I talk about psychology, the psychology of projection. I don't throw out the definition that they use, but I see where it is what? Inadequate. I add to it, I bring to it, or else I reach into my own cultural system and can arrive at that same point or even go beyond their points. So my main focus was arriving at your conclusions based upon a cultural analysis of your own self and of your own history and of your own circumstances and where you want to go. If other writers have written in such a way that it lends support to what you have arrived at, all the better. Take them in, use them, do what you want to with them. But don't go out, as many of our people do. Read the philosophies, read the ideologies, take them whole cloth, and impose them upon the analysis of African history, culture, and goals. You see, and this is the problem I have with it. And the other problem is, too, the psychological problem of when you take that philosophy, as I said earlier, and other people become the validators of it, you open yourself up to those other people manipulating you and your group for their own two individual purposes and needs. We have to be careful and distinguish between ideology and personality, you see, so that people will often espouse an ideology when they're hiding behind it to hustle their own personal programs and to hustle their own ethnic programs. That's why I try to distinguish between Islam as a religion and Islam as a tool of Arabs. You see what I'm saying? Well, I'm not going to fight with people over there believe in Islam as a religion. I will say, wait a minute though, this does not, to me, justify the Arabization of the black American economy or the Arabization of the African economy. But you're believing out, I have no problem with that whatsoever. But I think you're tipping over a line when you let that belief justify the destruction of your own people. Because I can't believe all that's justified the destruction of African people. And I can't believe Marx justifies the destruction of African people. And we have to watch another thing too, that whites want things both ways. They have set us up in such a way that they get us going and coming. And they're on both sides of this fence. You see, they kick your butt and steal and rape and rob you when they want to. And when you get into where they can't do that anymore, then they start playing egalitarian socialistic games. You see, and then what happens? They still keep what they had, and they still live off the good times in the great classless society. You know, so in the end, you know, they have not paid anything for what they've done and done anything. And often in the name of classlessness, you still see the African person still on the bottom of that bottom of that heap. Because let me tell you something about this European right quick. And again, when you read these Bibles, when that rich man came to Jesus and he said, I wanted to be saved, Jesus didn't just say, well, come on in, you're saved, did it? What did he tell him? Give the money back, right? Give the money back. You gotta what? Repent. You gotta what? Do reparation. You gotta pay. It's not enough to say, oh, well, we're all equal, we're all brothers. And you know what he did to them? Took right off. And what did Jesus tell him? He has as much of a chance to get to heaven as a needle. This is the kind of game.
That the progress of mankind is going in full circle. In other words, we started out with primitive feudalism. We developed into a social society in Egypt with a monarchy, being fair with the resources available. We developed into an imperialistic race of people and started invading other countries along with the Europeans. You see what I mean? So we developed from feudalism into this capitalist society that developed into what they call an imperialistic society that has nowhere to go. You see what I mean? Because it's based on supply and demand. So you're going to see everything's going to go right down. But they got to develop some way to increase their market outgrowth throughout the world, taking other countries, waging another war, whatever. You understand? But the whole thing goes in full circle, and it's going to wind down where we break back to primitive, communalism. Understand? In other words, where there will be a fair distribution of wealth. You understand what I'm saying?
We have to end it here. Thank you very much for your comments and questions. And I look forward